Mr. President, we are ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration for second reading of House Bill 3408 under Committee Report Number 9.
Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill number 3408 under Committee Report number 9 is in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we are now in the period of interpellation, starting with the general principles. So may I move to open the period of interpellation, Mr. President?
Any objection? Hearing none. The period of interpellation is now open.
Mr. President, I move to recognize the sponsor and chairman of the Finance Committee, Senator Loren Legarda.
Senator Legarda is recognized.
Of course, the first crack is given to the Minority Leader, Mr. President, Senator Ralph Recto. But before you recognize Senator Ralph Recto, may I move for a 1-minute suspension?
Session is suspended.
We are ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the Minority Leader, Senator Ralph Recto.
Senator Recto, the Minority Leader, is recognized for interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat. The Chairperson is a well-known advocate of local weaves and indigenous textiles. And if I may liken this budget to the elegant ethnic dresses she likes to wear, then I can say that thanks to her, it is as intricately made and as beautifully woven. It is not easy to weave this tapestry of spending. You have to fasten together thousands of threads and hope that the finished product will be big enough to provide warm comfort for all. Especially to the President, so that when he shows off this tapestry of spending next year, people will not be shouting, "The Emperor has no clothes." Mr. President, it has been said that we campaign in poetry, but govern in prose. The budget is the prose of governance. It is the budget that translates rhetoric to reality. It redeems promises made. In governance, funds proposed in the budget speak louder than words. The budget is also the annual expression of development plans. A program that is not funded remains marooned in fantasy land. The budget is what separates drawing from reality. I agree with the good chairperson when she emphasized in her sponsorship speech that the budget is more than a row of numbers. Indeed, it is more than a spreadsheet and should not be seen as an accounting ledger. The conventional way of reading and dissecting the budget using the traditional PSMOE capital outlay FINEX way, or disaggregating it by region or by agencies, does not fully capture its importance to the Filipino. It is more than an allocation for payroll or an outlay for operating expenses or how much will be set aside for travel, for gasoline, and for utilities. It is more than a bill of particulars for roads to be paved, schools to be built, canals to be dug. The conventional way to read the budget is to hold a magnifying glass over the fine print and peso signs. But to better analyze it, the budget should be held up to higher exacting standards. In short, to view it from the prism of what we want to achieve as a nation. It should be gauged by how many poor it would deliver from poverty, how many jobs it would create, how it will and where it will spur growth, how it will distribute opportunity, and how many people it will liberate from chronic hunger. These are the checklists I will soon be asking from you, Madam Sponsor. And I know that you will agree with me that although the biggest chunk of the budget funds overhead, Its main objective, however, is how to overcome poverty and things that set us back from progressing. So for 3.3 trillion, how many people will march away from the poverty line by December next year? For 3.3 trillion, how many jobs will be created? Sa puntong ito, matagal na po akong proponent ng pagkakabit ng jobs odometer sa national budget. Dapat isama na natin yan sa BESF. For 3.3 trillion, how far will the GDP needle move? I will be asking this, Mr. President, because in looking at the budget, it is not the size of investment that is important, but the impact. It is the yield that matters. To truly measure a budget's efficacy, then we must subject it to the following tests. It's poverty-reducing, job-creating, growth-inducing potential. The second framework I will be using in scrutinizing this budget is to situate it in the long-term program of this administration. If the Duterte administration will be here for 6 years, and I have no doubt that it will, and I am not among those making daily novenas that it won't be able to, then this budget is the first of 6 annual installments it will be making. In effect, this is the 15% down payment of what you will spend, of what you hope to achieve and deliver by 2022. You cannot divorce one GAA from the overall spending plan. In fact, this maiden GAA of yours is important, for it is not only the cornerstone in resource allocation, but also sets the template. I want to have a tunnel end view so that we will know where the GAA for 2017 is in the overall scheme of things. You know, planning myopia is an ingrained trait in our political culture. We cannot see beyond 5 years. We treat a 5-year plan as too long and too far into the future. Mabuti na lang ang NEDA, mayroong ambisyon 2040. Our planning cycle follows the election calendar. Kung sa lokal, ang gusto, 1,000 days program. So much so that it creates bias for short gestating projects that must be inauguration ready in time to be milked for pogi points during the re-election period. Eh, hindi naman magpapa-re-elect ang Pangulong Digon. Kaya gusto kong tanungin ang relasyon nitong 2017 budget sa mga bagay na gusto niyang magawa by 2022. 6 years from now, our population will grow from this year's 103.6 million to roughly 114 million, meaning there will be 10.44 million more people to be fed, to be sheltered, to be cared for, to be schooled, to be kept safe. That is a given. Kung tataas ang population, ganun din ang budget. Batay sa aking estimate, sa loob ng 6 na taon, gagasta ang Administrasyon Duterte ng tumataginting na 26.71 trillion in 6 years. In comparison, using straight computation, si Pinoy, 12.84 trillion ang ginasta sa loob ng 6 na taon. Si GMA, 9.8 trillion sa 9 na taon. Sa bigas na lang, kung bawat Pinoy na halos lahat ay mahilig sa unlimited rice, ay kukonsumo ng 114 kilos kada taon, kailangan natin buksan sa irigasyon ang 475,000 na hektarya. Sapat na ba ang initial down payment sa 2017 upang makamit ang 2022 agricultural and nutritional goals para hindi lumaki lalo ang GNP or gutom na Pinoy? Between now and 2022, we must be able to create 12 million jobs or 2 million a year quality jobs, hindi yun nagpastol ka ng isang kambing, counted ka na as gainfully employed, unpaid family worker. This data comes from NEDA, so it is unimpeachable as well. Ang tanong, will this budget indeed be instrumental in generating 2 million jobs by December next year? Ang isa pang target ay ang pag-graduate sa kahirapan ng 7.1 million na Pinoy sa 2022. Mula 21.9 million poor nung nakarang taon, pabababain ito sa 14.8 million sa 2022. Not to mention na yung population tataas pa ng 10 million. Hindi naman ito isang bagsakan, paunti-unti. Itaya na lang natin na 1 milyon kada taon ang matatanggal sa hanap ng mahihirap. Ang tanong, paano magagawa ito ng 3.3 trillion na budget? The budget is a poverty-crushing tool. In the dashboard of indicators of how effective the budget is, the ability to cut the number of poor ranks among the most important. Sa edukasyon, kung taon-taon, tataas ang DepEd student population ng konserbatibong 1.7% na lamang, nangangahulugan ng pagsapit ng 2022, ang numbers of enrollees sa public schools ay tataas mula sa kasalukuyang 22 million hanggang 30 to 32 million o dagdag ng 8 hanggang 10 million. Ang tanong, sapat na ba ang down payment na ilalagak ng 2017 national budget upang masabi natin on track tayo para sa educational goals sa 2022? Isa pang tanong na nasa isip ng mga mamamayan, nagising na bago tumilaok ang manok upang makarating sa opisina ng maaga at hating gabi na makakauwi, ay sapat na ba ang down payment sa 2017 upang maibsan ang traffic dito sa Metro Manila? So, Mr. President, what lies ahead for this great country of ours will be the focus of my interpolation. My queries will go beyond next year's budget cycle. Gusto ko makita ang kabuuan because government spending plans should not be confined to the time it would take the earth to revolve around the sun. I know that we may never be precise in our projections, as there is no such thing as an infallible crystal ball. But nonetheless, we must strive to predict our prospective requirements so that we can match these with our revenue program, so that we can plan early on how to finance future needs, so that we can prepare for contingencies, so that we can realize our people's dreams. This budget cannot be taken separately. It is the foundation of future expenditures. I will also be focusing on revenues, and I am glad the man who will raise 9 billion a day next year to finance this budget is here. In the Government Division of Labor, while it is Secretary Ben Jokno who gets the credit in releasing the money, it is Sonny Dominguez who must raise the cash. Let us not forget that appropriation is a mere downstream activity of revenue collection. It is taxation which makes appropriation possible. The privilege to spend springs from the duty to collect taxes. Yes, the budget presented to us today is a catalog of expenditures. But because too often, big numbers mesmerize us, we seem to overlook the important fine print that every peso that will be spent will be collected from the people. And yet, the legislative tradition is that when it comes to the appropriations bill, we only sponsor and highlight the expenditures. We seldom sponsor the revenues it would entail. Kaya itatanong ko na rin, upang hindi mahirapan ang DOF, BIR, at BOC, kung ano ba ang mga gastusin na pwedeng ipagpaliban, na pwedeng tipirin. Perhaps by cutting expenses, we could lighten the burden this budget will impose on our people. lalong-lalo na ngayon na mayroong pangamba sa pagkapanalo ni Donald Trump sa Amerika bilang Pangulo. Should Trump be treated as a macroeconomic assumption? That I would like to ask as well from our economic managers. And lastly, Mr. President, the minority will also be asking what guarantees are in place that will prevent the repeat of the scourge that was underspending, which we saw in the just recent past. How can we turbocharge the utilization in a manner that will speed up spending without leaving the government shortchanged? Meron bang incentives na ibibigay doon sa mga mabilis at maayos gumugol ng pondo? At ano naman ang mga presidential invectives na ipupukol sa mga mahina at makupad gumasta? If our people pay taxes promptly, then the way they are reimbursed through this budget, which is said to be a catalog of rebates, must be done in a prompt manner as well. We owe it to them. There is no other way because budget delayed is development denied. Mr. President, Madam Chairperson, thank you for enduring my abbreviated, truncated, and very brief preliminary remarks. Total, abbreviated din naman ang plenary debates, shortened to 5 days. Kaya hinabaan ko na ang aking pasakalye. Mr. President, Madam Chairperson, how does the Philippines compare in terms of population to the 224 countries recognized by the United Nations? Pang-ilan tayo sa laki ng populasyon?
Before I answer that question, allow me to thank the good minority leader from Batangas and the Philippines for his very poetic and witty introduction to his questions, and I thank him for likening our budget to a tapestry of weaves and fibers that, though disparate and somehow different in regions and various sectors, are actually the weaves or the ties that bind us. And so with that, I thank you and will learn from your questions as former NEDA Director General and our minority leader now. Now to your question on population.
Yes.
Just allow me to get the figures. We're number 12 in the world. We're already number 12 in the world, Mr. President, with 102 million population.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Madam Chairman. No? Mahalaga yung laki ng population natin. In fact, kung number 12 tayo, dapat meron tayong ambisyon. Anyway, the most important resource of a country is its people. So dapat, dumating ang panahon, at least dapat ang Pilipinas, katulad ng nakaraan, ay nasa top 20 sa buong mundo. And that is why the population is part of the BESF, as part of our macroeconomic assumptions. No? Today, Madam President, how do we compare in terms of the size of our economy? Out of 224 countries, pang-ilan naman ang Pilipinas?
In terms of... ilan tayo? 36. We are 36, Mr. President, number 36 out of all the nations in the world in terms of
Thank you.
the size of
Size
our
of the
economy.
economy.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, thank
and
you.
right before us is Israel. Ireland comes after the Philippines, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, Madam Chairman. In terms of purchasing or GDP per capita, income ng bawat Pilipino, pang-ilan naman po tayo sa buong mundo? which is a better indicator for the living standard of a Filipino.
126. What are we? GDP rank.
Standing.
36. Oh, sorry. It says here, Mr. President, based on the facts, we're the 126th in the world
What year is that,
in
Mr.
GDP
President?
per capita. This is the present year, Mr. President.
Pang 126 tayo.
We're the 126th in the world, Mr. President, insofar as GDP per capita.
Okay. Let us assume that that is accurate, Mr. President. Pang ilan naman yung ating mga neighbors? Halimbawa, ang Singapore. Pang ilan ang Singapore sa buong mundo? Kung number 126 tayo, in the ASEAN region, pang ilan naman tayo?
Singapore, ilang population? Give me the GDP per capita of Singapore.
Halimbawa, ang Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam.
Yeah, GDP per capita of Singapore. Pang ilan sila? Since you cited Singapore, Mr. President, which is, they're number one in ASEAN, and their GDP per capita is 84,000, Mr. President.
Pang ilan sila?
They're number one in ASEAN.
Sa buong
Singapore.
mundo, pang ilan sila?
Sa mundo, pang ilan? I know that they're number one in ASEAN, but of
Yeah.
course, they're very, very small
At kung
population.
84,000 sila, dollars yun, ang Pilipinas, ano
They're
yung per
number 6
capita
in the
natin?
world. Singapore, Mr. President, is number 6 in the
That is
world.
correct.
While we are 126.
That is correct.
And they're number one in ASEAN.
At kung tayo, ano yung per capita natin?
Our per capita is, compared to 84,000, how much is our GDP per capita? 2,800?
Kahit round off na lang.
$3,000. Ang Singapore na kami, 84. Yeah, yeah. Just allow us to round it off to
Sure.
$3,000
$3,000.
per capita.
So,
Yes,
ang
GDP
kinikita
per
ng bawat Pilipino, $3,000 on the average. Ang kinikita ng bawat Singaporean, base sa nabanggit nyo, ay $84,000 on the average. What about Malaysia? What about Thailand? What about Indonesia? And Vietnam? Para makita lang natin our standing in the region.
Yes. Malaysia is not too far. It's 9,500. And where is Thailand?
Triple the Philippines.
And Thailand is 5,700.
Okay. Indonesia,
What is Indonesia? Indonesia is 3,300.
Vietnam,
Vietnam is 2,000.
malapit na tayo mahahabol ng Vietnam. Anyway, Mr. President, the reason why I bring this up is that meron ba tayong plano? Is it part of our plan? Since we all have to be competitive, and we're competing in the region as well. By the end of the term of President Duterte, where will we be?
We, Mr. President, we hope to increase, of course, our GDP per capita, and that is the reason why this is such a huge budget, which in your own words, a few days ago you mentioned, do you realize that this is actually much bigger than the Arroyo and the Aquino budget put together? And allow me to just mention, Mr. President, that the Duterte administration is aggressively pursuing an expansionary fiscal policy with the decision to increase the deficit to GDP ratio from 2% to 3% over the medium term.
Yes.
And this resource mobilization strategy will allow the government to invest more heavily in infrastructure and the much needed basic social services so that the infrastructure program will expand to 5.4% of GDP in 2017, to 7.1% by 2022, and social services increasing from 7.7% of GDP to 9.1% in 2022. So what we're saying, Mr. President, is hopefully with the infusion of so much capital and infrastructure spending in all regions of the country, you know this very well, it will generate jobs. At the same time, we are taking care of our people through the various livelihood programs, social protection programs, and just allow me, please, to name these programs: the livelihood or kabuhayan programs, rural emergency employment programs, tulong pang kabuhayan, panghanap buhay, special program or employment for students, livelihood programs for resettlement sites, etc. So all of this will be mentioned also in the agency per agency budget. So what we are saying is that there is, of course, this ambition, this dream, this vision of limiting, if not totally curbing, the poverty level. It is desired that by 2022, we have brought down our poverty incidence to 17%, Mr. President. And just to give credit where credit is due, the government target for poverty incidence of between 2 or 20 to 23% for the year 2015 during the Aquino administration was achieved. There are already 1.4 million less Filipinos in 2015 than in 2009, despite the increase in population. Extreme poverty, as measured by subsistence incidence, or the proportion of the population who could not afford to meet their basic food requirements, was reduced to more than half, or 8.1% of population and 5.7% of families attaining then the Millennium Development Goals. Of course, now we have the SDG, or the Sustainable Development Goals of, at the time, the MDG's target was having extreme poverty. And in 2015, this was actually arrived at or achieved. And so among individuals, if I may add, poverty incidence has been reduced by 3.6 percentage points from 2012 to reach 21.6 in 2015. And that is a reason why the continued implementation and enhancement of government social programs have helped increase the income of the poorest sectors of society. We're referring to the CCT, to the Kalahi Seeds, and to the SLP, Sustainable Livelihood Program, that provides additional support in coping with major shocks and have actually helped to diversify livelihood sources. So with an increase in spending for infrastructure and the 24/7 push of implementation of the infrastructure projects, and with the social enhancement and social protection programs of government, hopefully we will achieve our target of curbing poverty incidence to 17%, hopefully lower, by 2022, Mr. President.
Thank you for the response, Madam Chair. But, you know, my question really was, do we have a conscious effort to look at ourselves in the region and comparing ourselves to the rest of the world, that by 2022 or by 2040, will we be in the top 20 countries in the world? It is a function of our growth, Mr. President. Now, if the plan of the Duterte administration were to grow by 7% annually between now and 2022, we made estimates, and that we would reach a per capita income of roughly 220,000 pesos, or 4,000 US dollars to round it off. So from 3,000 today to roughly 4,000 to 4,400 by 2022. How would that compare now to the region? Is there yan ba na pag-aaralan ng NEDA, halimbawa, tinitignan yung mga bagay na yan?
Yes, Mr. President. In fact, as I speak today, there is a summit and an expo of our ambition natin, the vision of NEDA till 2040. And may I just state, Mr. President, that by 2022, this is insofar as the vision is concerned, poverty rate hopefully will be reduced to 17%. That translates into 10 million Filipinos uplifted from poverty. To achieve high middle income status, where per capita gross national income increases from 3,000 to 4,100 US dollars by 2022, and by 2040, as you mentioned, which is 24 years or a generation from now.
So, is that correct what I heard you? That by 2022, 3,100 lang tayo?
4,100 by 2022, Mr. President.
So more or less my projections are accurate based on what you're mentioning.
Very accurate, Mr. President,
thank you.
yes. And by 2040, to achieve high income status, where per capita increases from to 12,000 US dollars by 2040, where Malaysia and South Korea are today. So you were asking for
So
a
they will probably
comparison.
double by then.
Yes, Mr. President.
yeah.
So we are being realistic here.
Unless we grow at a faster rate.
At a faster rate, you're correct. Actually, let me just say, Mr. President, everything you are telling me, I totally agree with. In fact, when this was presented to me a week ago, and I said, by 2040, will I still be around by then? And that is only the time that we will reach what Korea, South Korea, and Malaysia are today. I can't wait. And so I feel your urgency.
If we spend more on healthcare, you will live much longer, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
And still
so-
as beautiful as today.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just translate it to lesser questions. So, so Mr. President, I agree with you. And those were the same questions I asked the NEDA when they presented it to me. We can't wait till 2040. In fact, if we are to recast our budget based on your suggestions, so the spending will double and triple and quadruple so that we can reach ambition natin by 2022 and not 2040. Whoever has that magic pill or that magic formula to tell us that from 126 we can be top 20 in 2022 or by 2040, I will allow you, please, help me to recast the budget so that we can speed up our...
That is exactly the purpose of my interpolations, Madam President.
I'm sorry?
That is exactly the purpose of my interpolations. How do we make the budget more effective so that we can grow at a faster rate? Now, having said that, Madam President, it's important to look at the past as well. During the Arroyo administration from 2001 to 2010, what was the growth rate of the Arroyo administration?
Arroyo,
4.8. Of course, it depends on which year you start,
What year
2001
was
and
4%?
full year of 2010. On the average, Madam President, to shorten the interpolation,
Average of 4%.
roughly 4.8%. Is that
It was an
correct?
average of 4.3%
Yes.
during the Arroyo administration, yes.
Okay. If you take it from 2000 to 2009, I'm sorry, it is 4.8%. Okay. What was it during the Aquino administration from 2010 to 2016? What was the average growth? About 6.2%.
6%.
That is correct.
6.2%.
And the target under the Duterte administration is anywhere between 7 to 8%. Is that correct?
6 to 7%, yes. Up to 7. We'll try to 8 for 8%.
7 to 8%. Yes.
Up to 7 to 8%. Yes,
Yes.
Mr. President.
And as I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, during the time of President Arroyo, for 9 years, she spent 9 years' budget equivalent to 9.8 trillion pesos. Is that correct, Madam President?
I believe your facts could be correct, yes.
Correct. And during the time of President Aquino, how much was the 6-year budget for the entire 6 years?
10.6. The 6 years of the Aquino administration spent 10.6 trillion, Mr. President.
Okay, we have a little difference in the number. It's a bit larger than that, but I will not dispute those numbers, Mr. President. How much do we expect the Duterte administration to spend in the next 6 years?
Magkano ang total natin for 6 years? 26 trillion. The projected expenditures for 6 years, Mr. President, will be 26 trillion.
That is correct. 26.7 trillion,
Yes.
more or less, with an average growth of 7%.
Yes.
7. Now, we also have the data on how much GMA borrowed. How much did GMA borrow during her 9 years?
You've heard borrowings? The total borrowings of the Arroyo administration is 4.8 trillion, Mr. President.
What is the net borrowing?
This is the gross borrowing.
Yes.
Net financing is 1.8 trillion, Mr. President.
What about the Aquino administration?
Aquino gross borrowing is 3.3 trillion, and the net financing is 1.5 trillion, Mr. President.
Almost the same. Little difference. Okay. What about the planned borrowing net of the Duterte administration for the next 6 years?
How much do you plan? 6 years. No, I have this already. How much do you plan to borrow for 6 years? This is your borrowing as of now. This is 160. What is this million? That's billion. This is projected for 2017. The gross borrowing just for 2017 is 160 billion, and for net financing it's 109 billion. But I will check, Mr. President, if you
Would
want
they have a
the
program?
projected,
Yes, projected
the
for 6
projected
years.
6 years. You have a projected borrowing for 6 years. The projected 6-year borrowing, Mr. President, is 5.1 trillion.
That might be a little too high, but nevertheless,
That's the gross
point-
borrowing, Mr.
Yes,
President.
yes.
Are you sure of the gross borrowing of 5.1 trillion? That's your gross borrowing. That's from the Bureau of Treasury, Mr. President. A 5.1 trillion
Net
projected
borrowing na yan.
gross borrowing, Mr. President. What's your
Roughly,
net?
our estimate is about 3.6 trillion.
What's your net?
3% deficit every year for the next 6 years, more or less. the net borrowing will be more or less that amount, assuming the revenues grow by 11%, without new taxes, assuming. Okay. Having said that, Mr. President, this is the point I'd like to make. If, you know, it's common said that whoever you put in Malacanang today, because the growth drivers of the economy, by and large, are OFW remittances, BPOs. Kahit sinong Pangulong ilagay mo sa Malacanang, the economy generically will grow anywhere from 6 to 7%. Even if you do not spend the entire budget as planned, as in the previous years. Meron generic growth, more or less 6%. Meaning to say, if this administration will incur a deficit, an additional 1% deficit to GDP, why will the growth only increase by 1%, from 6 to 7? Shouldn't we be aspiring for a higher growth rate of, say, something like double-digit 10%? Why a very conservative 7%? Why not, if we spend the budget more productively, like cutting wasteful spending, invest more in productive investments, why can't we grow higher than 7%?
Mr. President,
Yes.
it does not say that we will actually put a cap on our growth targets, Mr. President. The economic team is just one in saying that, yes, we could even achieve higher than 7 or 8%, but we want to temper the expectations of people, and it is probably best to have conservative estimates or targets insofar as a growth is concerned than curb it down later when we've not reached the growth target. And so that is the sentiment of the
So to
economic team.
temper expectations.
Just so that people would not expect. However, with the heavy infrastructure spending and, yes, as you mentioned, the remittances of overseas Filipino workers and BPOs, hopefully we could even surpass the targets that we have set out. We can actually grow up to 10% if we invest more, from 20% of GDP to 30% of GDP. And however, they simply place their targets to 7 to 8% growth.
So there is an admission, in effect, that we can grow double-digit.
We can grow, Mr. President, if we invest more and if we invest 30% of GDP.
When you say invest 30% of GDP, you are referring to the public sector having a bigger portion from 21% today to 30%.
Yes, this would include both public and private sector, but the public sector investment, of course, should come first in terms of heavy infrastructure spending, which the government is doing presently, which it has planned for.
Okay. Mr. President, what is the admin cost of the government? If you have next year's budget is 3.3 trillion. What is the productive portion of the budget? How much is the productive portion of the budget, more or less?
Meron kayo nun?
I suppose the productive portion will be your capital outlays and a few MOOE items, particularly scholarships, health insurance.
That's the admin. 165, that's B. You were asking for the admin support of the budget, Mr. President. It's 165 billion for 2017.
Mr. President, I think what my basic question
But
was
you were
that
asking
the
what would
productive
spur...
portion of the budget.
Yes.
The productive portion of the budget would
Would be
actually be your capital
capital
outlay
outlay
and
and
a
more.
few items under your MOE.
Yes, Mr.
In a
President.
rough,
So, i-minus mo.
roughly, Madam President, Madam Chairman, 65% of the budget is more or less admin expenses. 35% of the budget is investment-related expenses.
Approximately, Mr. President, when you put operations and the projects, it would be 2.7 trillion. The figure I mentioned earlier, based on your first question, was the admin cost of the budget. But in terms of operations and projects, that's 2.7 trillion of the 3.3 trillion.
Let's look at it from this perspective, Mr. President. Let's say 3.3 trillion divided by 100 million, magkano yun? 33,000 per capita ang spending natin next year. Isn't that correct?
Yes, Mr. President.
More or less. Huh? Okay. Assuming lahat yun ilagay natin pasweldo ng empleyado, will that make the economy grow? Let's say 3.3 trillion ilagay natin sa PS lahat. What will be the growth of the economy? You will not achieve your growth targets, is that correct?
We will not, definitely, Mr.
Correct.
President.
Okay. Let's say walang capital outlay at lahat ilagay mo sa MOE lang. Will that spur economic growth as well?
No, Mr. President. Of
No,
course,
we
we need capital outlay for infrastructure spending.
Yes. Let's say if your PS and MOE was 50% and your capital outlay spending was 50% of the budget, is it possible that you can grow double digit at a faster rate?
$50% of
Yeah,
the whole
assuming.
budget.
Yes.
50% for capital outlay?
Instead of 800, you talk about 1.6 trillion, halimbawa, per capital outlay. The productive portion of the budget, particularly on infrastructure. I mean, theoretically, isn't that correct?
1/4 of the budget now. Yes. You're saying that whatever our allocation is now for infrastructure spending and economic activity could be upped, increased to much more, at least half of the budget.
I mean, what I'm saying is that theoretically, if you spend more on capital outlay, instead of PS only or MOE, for
Understood.
example, the economy could grow at a faster rate. Then
Yes,
you can
Mr.
reduce
President.
poverty faster and be
Yes,
more
Mr.
competitive in the ASEAN region and with the rest of the world. Isn't
Yes,
that
Mr.
correct?
President.
Yes.
If we increase even more
Yes, that
our
is correct.
economic activities, programs, infrastructure, you're correct.
And if, for example, you had a good PPP framework and that you're able to utilize park resources, we have so much liquidity in the system of roughly about 2.5 trillion lying with the central bank that can be utilized to finance PPP projects. Isn't that correct? Meaning to say, not everything can be in the budget. It could be off-budget items as well,
Yes, you're correct, Mr. President.
right?
You're correct.
Realizing that if government's admin costs, if you look at PS and MOE, is roughly 2/3 of the budget, which is less productive. Kung admin costs natin 65%, ang investment 35%, whereas in the private sector, it's the other way around. Admin costs would likely be 30%, 35%. Investments would be roughly 60-65%. Meaning to say that the private sector is actually more efficient than the public sector. So since there's a lot of liquidity in the system, why can't we use the private sector also to boost our infrastructure spending domestically? Then you can make the economy grow at a faster rate as well.
It is therefore the suggestion of the
Yes, and we
good
have filed
senator
bills
that
accordingly.
perhaps in crafting the budget, more, a
Now,
bigger
two things what I'm
allocation.
suggesting. One is to put on record that the productive portion of the budget is really in your capital outlay
Yes.
investments, with the exception of a few items in MOE, such as scholarships, health insurance, investment in human capital development, so on and so forth. And there's a lot of waste in the budget that you can cut and to put it to capital outlay and more infrastructure.
I agree with you in concept, Mr. President, but just to put on record that 25.6 already, or 1/4 of the budget, is devoted to infrastructure.
Correct.
And 40% covers the social services, which would include productive portions. This would be the CCT, the livelihood programs, health, education.
Let me get to CCT. Let
Yeah.
me get to CCT. Just an example.
And the livelihood program. So,
Assuming,
yeah.
I understand where you're coming from, but assuming, Madam President, kung 3.3 trillion yung budget, kung gawin natin CCT lahat yun, 33,000, every Filipino bigyan natin ng 33,000, maganda ba yan para sa ekonomiya natin?
What will happen for the short term, Mr. President, mahahango mula sa kahirapan kaagad, and maybe more will be transitioning. But Mr. President, what happens to our transport, our railways, our
Precisely
roads
my
and
point.
networks, farm to market?
Precisely
What
my
happens to
point.
our farmers? So
Precisely my
we
point.
just have to balance
The
everything.
reason
Mr.
why we
President.
don't do it that way is because we're mindful of where we should make those investments to a certain degree. And I'm saying that there are many portions in the budget. I can cite a few right now that you can cut. It will be at a later date in my interpolation. But I can give you a few examples. What are the areas that you can cut under MOE na admin cost na possible inefficiently that you can reallocate for capital outlay, as an example, to build more roads, to build more rail, to improve your airport, your seaport, to have free public college tertiary education, to reduce the out-of expenses of the ordinary Filipino when he gets sick, improve your health care, so on and so forth, Madam President. But let me move on. We'll get to those data later on a bit, if you don't mind, Mr. President. Okay. We mentioned that the Arroyo administration grew by 4.8, Aquino 6.2, Duterte plans 7 to 8%. I'm saying that we should plan for a higher growth rate, especially so that we will be borrowing more, and even with a 3% GDP deficit, by the end of 2022, based on our estimates and calculation, the debt to GDP will continuously go down, even if you have a higher deficit of 3% of GDP. I'm sure that Secretary Jokdon knows this. He's nodding his head. Even
Mr.
if you
President.
borrow more, by 2022, your debt to GDP will go down. The challenge is, when you borrow money, just like Henry C., just like all the others in the business sector, you invest that money to make it grow faster. So it's hindi problemang umutang for as long as you put it in productive investment. Ayaw mong umutang para mailagay sa admin expense. You want to borrow money to invest in the future, that there is a payback, that there is a return. Isn't that correct?
Yes, Mr. President, and you mentioned the debt to GDP ratio. Let me just point out that the present debt to GDP ratio is 42.7,
Correct.
but the projection by 2022 is 35.4, and it's clearly declining,
Going
Mr.
down.
President.
Correct.
Yes.
So, and there's a lot of fiscal space in the budget. It's, let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. In 2015, traveling expenses was 11.7 billion. In 2017, 17.6 billion. Why is there such a big jump? There's a lot. of
11
items.
to
11.7 billion And in 2017, that's 17.6 billion. Now, if we are using in the macroeconomic assumptions a 2%, what is the inflation rate, Mr. President? 3%?
I'm glad that you mentioned that, Mr. President, because I've actually been citing the excessive traveling expense, and I'm asking the LBRMO to check the rise from 11 to 17 billion. I actually cut the traveling expense of one government agency to only 1 million pesos next year, and that's a Climate Change Commission, because they had an excessive traveling budget.
No.
And I said that the work to do is here. So, taking on from what you suggested, we will, after this, look at the traveling budget, and you can suggest your cuts on travel of selected agencies whose operations will not be affected with those cuts.
I'll
Thank
give you an example, Madam President. In the BESF, we have here the GDP, you have growth rates, targets and assumptions, you have the population. We know that by 2022, the population will roughly be 14 million. By 2040, it will be 140 million. We have to plan accordingly. You have to grow at a faster rate. You have inflation. Inflation is what? 3%. 2 to 4. On the average, 3% is your assumption and target. Now, why don't we use those numbers? Why do we have inflation in the BESF? For what purpose? To determine revenue expenses only? Sensitivity analysis? Or do we use that also in planning the expenditure? Like for example, bumaba naman ang presyo ng gasolina. Ang laki ng binaba. Bakit naman yung traveling expenses, ang laki ng itataas? Oh, I'll give an assuming 11.7 billion yung traveling. You keep it at 11.7 billion. What can you do with the 6 billion? We can use that to reduce the cost of education in public state universities by half, as an example, or reduce out-of-pocket expenses of the poor when they get sick, or improve the health facilities nationwide, or build more roads and bridges. That's one example. I can go on and on. Supplies and materials, 61.5 billion. I'm just using this as a base. I've not even asked if we spent this money. I can later. Magkano ba talaga na-obligate dito? Magkano na-disburse? And why are we proposing 84 billion? That's 23 billion more in supplies and materials expenses, as an example. Why can't we cut it by 10 billion? Then we can use it again for the more important investments. Infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports, seaports, rail. We can use that for free public college education. We can use that for better health services. I'm sure magagastos yun. Sa dami na nagkakasakit, kulang ang gamot.
Yes.
Sa mga hospital.
Yeah, Mr. President, just to clarify, the figures you've been mentioning are 2015
Yes.
as your base year.
Yes.
Yes. That will expire, as you know.
Examples lang to.
Yes, yes.
Examples lang.
Correct.
That's just the point. We have to rethink how we do things. That is the point that I'm trying to drive at. Now, especially if we want to reduce poverty incidence at a faster rate. We will get to that. Now, during Arroyo, think about it this way. We grew by 4.8%. The population when she started was 78 million. At the end of her term, the population was 93 million. She spent 9.8 trillion, borrowed 1.3 billion. What is the effect? How many jobs did she create? And what was the reduction in poverty? In 2000, 33% of the population was below the poverty line. 78 million Filipino souls. 25 million were below the poverty, 33%. At the end of her term, that went down to 23.3 million, 26.3%. Okay? So how many jobs did she create? In the year 2000, there were 27.5 million employed. By the end of her term, there was 36 million employed. She created 9 million jobs. During the time of President Aquino, the economy grew by 6.2%, spent roughly 12.8 trillion, borrowed roughly 1.5 trillion. In 2010, he started with a population of 93 million. He ended up with a population of 103 million. There were 37 million employed. At the end of his term, 41 million employed. Created 4 million jobs. Okay, so in the last 16 years, the two administrations created 13 million jobs. In the next 6 years, what is the plan of the Duterte administration? To create, from reading the documents, to create 12 million jobs. Is that correct?
Just as an example, Mr. President,
Yes.
our 861 billion infrastructure budget for 2017 alone will create some 530,000 jobs. And since, as you know, infra has a multiplier effect of 2, will create more than 1 million jobs, both direct and indirect. But that's just for construction, for infrastructure. Yeah. So hopefully PPOs and tourism and others in the service sector will also create, will be job generating. So the 2 million jobs targeted for 2017 can be achieved.
Yes. Ulitin ko lang these are all facts already. This is all data. So in the 16 years, they created 13 million new jobs. We plan to create 12 billion new jobs. Okay? And you're saying that the most productive portion of the budget nga naman is your infra. That's where you intend to create the jobs. Is that correct? So if we spend more on infra, you could probably create more jobs and grow the economy at a faster rate. Okay? And why do we want to create these jobs? Because you want to reduce poverty incidence. So, what is the baseline for poverty? Nasaan ba talaga tayo today?
Let me just,
yes.
yes. Just to give you some statistics on poverty as you requested. The broad-based decrease in poverty incidence eased disparities across regions. NCR and its adjacent regions continued to post the lowest poverty incidence, while regions in Mindanao recorded the highest. Based on 2012 full-year official poverty statistics, fishermen, farmers, and children consistently posted the highest poverty incidences among the 9 basic sectors in the Philippines in 2012 at 39.2, 38.3, and 35.2 respectively. Also, of the 5 of the 9 basic sectors, consisting of fishermen, farmers, children, self-employed, unpaid family workers, and women, have higher poverty incidence than the general population, estimated at 25.2% in 2012. Let me just look at 2015. ARM,
What, no, what is
Caraga.
the, yeah, I'm familiar with all that information, Madam President.
Yes.
The question is, nasan ba tayo ngayon? What is the official poverty statistic today? Is it 26.3% or is it 21.9? Is it 21.6?
2015, 16.5.
For 2015, there's a latest.
Individuals, 21.6%.
21.6%.
For individuals.
For individuals in 2016.
Not 2015.
That's all we have, 2015.
Oh, yeah, because, yeah.
It's 21.6% of the population.
That is the latest data.
21.6%.
6% of the population in 2015. That's all we have, yeah.
Okay. So this is the base figure that we will use. 21.6%. So in effect, during the Aquino administration, if they started at 26.3, they were able to reduce poverty to 21.6. Is that correct? More or less?
25.2.
I'm sorry, what was the question, Mr. President?
Yeah, when the Aquino administration took office, I mentioned earlier, during GMA, 33 down to 26. 26 now down to 21. Is that correct?
In 2012, it was 25.2.
And what will be the plan of the Duterte administration? From 21 down to 13. Is that correct?
Or 14.
21 to 14.
To 14%.
14%. To 14%, Mr. President.
That's the plan. Correct?
Yes,
Yes.
Mr. President.
That means 15,930,000 na lang ang may iwan poor in 2022 of a population of 112 million.
15
More or less.
million poor.
Okay?
That is the plan, Mr. President.
And that's why you need to create those 12 million jobs. Now, before we get to where are the jobs going to be created, sino ba yung may hirap?
As I mentioned earlier, allow me to
Farmers,
state
fishermen,
yes, fisher folks,
farmers,
farmers,
at yung walang kuryente.
yes, migrant and informal sector,
Yeah.
children, self-employed, and unpaid family workers.
Okay. How many people are employed in the agriculture sector?
33%. One-third.
25%?
One-third of our economy,
Yeah, it used to
one-third
be-
of our population,
that's right.
33%.
It used to
Mr.
be
President.
one-third.
One-third.
We're now roughly 25%, one-fourth of the economy. What is the contribution of agriculture to the total economy? What is
Very
the
low.
gross value added of agriculture? 10%.
Around 10% is a
Okay.
contribution
So look
of
at it this way.
agriculture
So
to the
maliwanag.
economy.
Kung 25% of the economy are in agriculture and they only contribute 10% of the total wealth, sila yung pinakamahirap.
That's true, Mr. President.
Okay. So, why is it in the 2017 budget, in terms of agriculture, what is the strategy ba as far as agriculture is concerned? What do we expect? Will agriculture's value increase? Will the incomes of farmers and fishermen in the next 6 years? Is this where you intend to create the jobs or increase their incomes?
Mr. President, since one-third of our population are also the poorest sectors, and those are the farm workers, agricultural workers, we believe that infrastructure spending will also benefit our farmers and our fisher folks. This will include more access to the markets of their products and irrigation. As you can see, it's the first time that there's a budget where the farmers don't have to pay for their irrigation, where a 2 billion subsidy will be placed in the National Irrigation Administration so that the farmers
I do have a
can be
bill on that as
free of
well,
this.
and I'm glad that the chairman of the committee provided for this 2 billion.
Yes,
So
Mr.
that is a very good amendment which I support.
Thank you.
from the chair.
This
of
was
the-
a campaign promise of the President,
Yes.
Mr. President, and we heeded that campaign promise while we were watching on the sidelines when he was still campaigning. And so early on, as early as July, when Secretary Piñol of DA came to us and requested for this, there are pending measures. I think it's Senator Villar and others who have this pending bill. But I thought to be proactive about the budget, that we should provide for it already in a 2017 budget, even if the bill is not yet enacted into law. So thank you for your
Yes,
support
I
for
support that, Madam President. But since we're talking about the poor and agriculture, okay, why is it that the Pulse Asia and SWS have a different data as far as the poor are concerned? Meaning to say, kung tatanungin mo yung tao, self-rated poor, pareho. Bottom line, yung Pulse Asia at SWS, 42%. Double that of the government statistic. Yung government statistic, magkano per capita poverty threshold ba? 59 pesos a day. Isn't that correct? You have to earn, meaning if you earn 60 pesos a day, hindi ka na mahirap. Is that correct?
That's the definition.
That's the
of
official
poor.
poverty definition, right?
Official definition of poor.
Huh?
That's the official definition,
Definition
of
of poor.
Mr.
60
President.
pesos a day. Ang
But
kailangan
even
mo-
above 60, that's still poor.
That's
yes.
right. Huh? So,
Perhaps we
posibleng
should
very
redefine
much
poor.
understated.
You're
Yung
correct. It's
data natin.
understated. We should actually be more realistic in our definition of poor.
Okay. Now, what is the basic strategy aside from the infrastructure? And like I said, so you agree with me, if we spend more on infra, economy can grow faster, reduce poverty even more, so on and so forth, right? Okay. What is the strategy? You still have a huge item on your conditional cash transfer, DSWD. Di ba? I suppose that is a major strategy. Is that correct?
The reason why we're continuing and even expanding to 4 million families, the Pantawid program, Mr. President. And I understand also last night, in relation to your question about agriculture, the NETA board also approved 3 agriculture-related projects last night, out of 8 projects, according to the
Okay.
NETA secretary.
Okay. Okay, let's do it one by one.
Yes.
So, social protection as far as the poor are concerned, DSWD. Okay. How much have we spent since 2008 para sa cash transfer? And how much have we borrowed for cash transfers?
Our budget for next year for 4Ps is 7.
At dadagdagan pa natin
I know our
yan.
budget for 2017 is 78 billion. Let
Plus,
me check since
does
the
that include
launch.
the rice program?
That includes
Cash.
the rice subsidy, which will be given in cash grants. But this was launched in 2008, so let me ask, from 2008 to the project to 78 billion 2017, how much have you spent for CCT?
So it must be a significant amount already. Huh? Okay, so that's one.
Let me just get the
Yes,
figure, Mr.
sure.
President. I also want to know. So total on CCT from 2008.
Half a trillion na siguro. 870. Mga 950 na. So siguro until next year, mga 950 billion, close to 1 trillion pesos.
6.5
CCT.
billion. Yeah. It started 6.5. Mr. President, when it was launched in 2008, it was only 6.5 billion, then expanded, as you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
we should
So
know because
total is about 9, including next year, mga 950 na. Almost close to 1 trillion, more or less.
just a minute. Yeah.
2008 to 8 years. 9 including next year.
Just to be accurate, Mr. President, the 4-piece program, the total authorized appropriation is 342 billion. 342, Mr. President, from 2008.
342 lang?
342. Yes. Up to 2016. Up to 2016, Mr. President.
Yeah, you're correct. I stand corrected.
342.7 billion.
Correct.
Without the 78 billion
For next
allocation
year.
for next year. Yes.
So almost half a trillion na, if we include next year. Okay.
Plus 78.
And we
So
discussed
400.
also earlier,
400.
if you divide the budget, 3.3 trillion divided 100 million, bigay mong cash transfer lahat, hindi maganda. Di ba?
Yes,
We agreed
Mr.
on that
President.
earlier, Okay, moving on. So next
But
strategy.
let me just add, Mr. President, that the four-piece program is not the only social protection
I agree with
program.
you. That's why I'm moving to the
May
next one.
pamana, kalahi
Yes.
seeds,
Correct.
many more. And in fact,
You know the problem with all of those other programs? The admin expenses
Ay.
are too high.
tumpak po kayo. No, in fact, I noticed in every government agency, they have some micro enterprise program from DOST to DTI,
Yeah.
DSWD,
You know, the specifics
etc.
of that, I'll just
And the
ask
admin
during the
expense.
department agency already. I
No,
will
but you're
not
correct.
belabor the issue.
You're
General
correct.
principles pa lang naman tayo Strategy, di ba? Okay.
I agree with you that we must abbreviate, make more efficient the admin expense, the admin bureaucratic
Yeah.
red tape of the programs.
And then, since we know that the poor is in the rural area, understated pa, based on our agreement earlier, agriculture, farmers, fishermen, and those without electricity. Magkano naman ang budget for agriculture? Why did we allocate, how much did we allocate for agriculture next year?
194B. What is
Huh?
your admin? For 2017, agriculture gets 93.45 billion, Mr. President.
Broken down. One is the National Irrigation Administration, o yung GOCCs, di ba?
The NIA, NFA, PCA, SRA, PCIC, Philippine Rice,
So, ang dami niyang
Dairy
mga...
Authority, Tobacco, Fisheries.
Okay. Okay, so 93 billion. Okay. If you take a look at that, it sounds large, 93 billion. But that is less than 1% of GDP. Two-thirds of 1% siguro that you're spending on agriculture. Now, of the 93, magkano naman yung sa mismong agriculture department?
DA would have 45.29, but also because agriculture is a devolved function, then the LGUs, of course, will contribute their
Yeah,
share.
but the LGUs don't have the resources. Minimal.
Their
Minimal.
ERA, Mr. President?
The ERA is, how much is the ERA? Half a trillion. That is what?
The LGUs have money, Mr. President, through their ERA?
Look at it this way.
and
3.3 trillion yung budget. The ERA is what? 500 roughly. 486 billion.
500 billion.
Yes, divided by
586.
45,000 barangays,
500 billion.
80 provinces, 105 cities, so on and so forth. Everything is really with the national government. Very minimal is at the local level, no? Now, having said that, the productive portion in the budget for DA, in terms of locally funded projects, from 11.3 billion in 2016 down to 6.1. Foreign assisted, 9.1 down to 2.2 billion. Okay? Not to mention, no matter how much money you give to NIA, their absorptive capacity is terrible. We will get to that later on when we make a rundown of these utilization rates. But that's the point. I'm mentioning this so that the economic managers can start planning and cracking the whip on this very important government agency. if you want to reduce poverty, more important than DSWD is really increasing the productivity in agriculture, where most of the poor are located. 25% of the population is in agriculture. Their value added is only 10%. Not to mention that by 2017, July, we will be lifting the restrictions on rice importation. What is in the budget for rice farmers insofar as when we lift those rice importations? Apektado yan. But maybe that question I can ask during the
I think during the
agriculture department. Ito, general principles pa lang tayo dito. Okay, now, having said that, and, you know, for sure naman papasa yung budget eh. Walang problema dito. We will be cooperative, but we'd like to put, since we only have 3 voices anyway, in the minority decided to put our, to record our manifestations here. Okay? Having said that, no, what is the other critical component to improve agriculture? Credit. Okay? What new things are we undertaking to improve credit to agriculture? Because if I take a look at the Agri-Agra law, magkano ba ang total loanable funds?
Treasury. Agri-Agra. Treasury. Agri-Agra, total loanable.
How much is total loanable funds in the banking sector?
Author ng batas na yan eh.
How much goes to agriculture? How much investments are made aside from government in agriculture?
Can I be candid with you about that?
Yes.
I'm the author of the law.
I know.
And during the hearing, I asked, and there's really non-compliance with the Agri-Agra law, Mr. President.
Let me cite you the statistics
Yes.
and
Here.
what interventions can be made. Halimbawa, total loanable funds, well, according to the central bank, is 3 trillion. I think it's much more than this, but let me use this figure.
You want me to put into the record
Yes. How much is total loanable funds?
June of 2016? No, this is total Agri-Agra compliance. This is compliance.
Total loanable funds is 2.99 trillion.
2.99.
6 trillion.
Yes, you're correct.
Okay.
As of June, yeah, 2016.
How much should go to Agra? 299 billion or 300 billion. How much should go to agriculture? 449 billion.
449.
What is the compliance sa Agra?
The direct compliance is 22.9.
Correct. Of
And-
299, less than 1%.
That's why I told you, Mr. President, that there is
Correct.
non-compliance with this very important law.
Yes.
Because the reason why we authored that was we really believe that the agricultural workers, including the beneficiaries of agrarian reform, should have access to credit.
Correct.
But there is non-compliance.
You cannot increase productivity and create jobs without credit.
Exactly. That's why I've been nagging previous administrations and the
At
present
para
on
saan
the
yung
compliance of
investment
this.
grade credit rating natin? Na ngayon pinakamababa ang interest rate, pero hindi napapakinabangan ng magsasaka. What is government doing about it?
Dapat
Di ba
yung
may
bank,
bangko tayo, land bank? Okay? Now, okay, so let's go to that.
The
Less than
Secretary-
1% compliance
Yes.
on Agra. How much should be allocated to agriculture naman sa credit? 395 billion. What is the compliance rate? How much was given to them? 144 billion, 184. So, 13%. Di ba? That's for the agriculture naman. Okay. What can be done here?
You know what can be
What
done
is
is
the
to just
suggestion?
implement our laws, Mr. President. It's such a well-intended law.
Correct.
And you're correct in bringing this up because I bring this up every time, every year. And I hope that the present government, which is really a bias for the poor, could see to it that the Agri-Agra law is implemented. If you read the law, will really provide, this will be life-changing for our agricultural workers if they just allow them access
I
to the
have no
credit.
doubt that the
Yes.
present administration and the president and the economic team are well-intentioned. Okay, and that's the beauty of having a democracy, that we in the minority can also make suggestions, di ba?
Yeah. It's a
Okay, now,
valid
having
suggestion.
said that, yes, having said that, what can be done? You know, maybe one of the reasons why you have a low compliance rate is because the universal and commercial banks,
Yes.
do not have it's not their business model, in effect, to lend to the agriculture sector.
I
And
agree
that's
with you, Mr.
precisely why government has a bank.
Yes.
So the indirect compliance could be government issues a bond or the land bank issues a bond, pays interest to the commercial universal banks who can buy this bond. Bahala na land bank magpautang. They should have that capability, that business model.
According
Diba?
to the Secretary of Finance, Land
Yes.
Bank will lend more to farmers. And let me just put on record, as of June 30, without this administration yet, the loans to the agri-sector is 83.3 billion, and to micro-enterprises, just 4.7 billion, and to SMEs, 51.1 billion.
There's
And
another
so,
issue, masyado maliit yun din yung sa MSME, but we'll get to that later.
I'm author also of that law, Mr. President, Agri-Agra and
So
MSME.
So was I before as well.
Yes, the
okay.
original
Correct,
bill.
the original.
Yes. Again,
law.
that's another law that's not being complied with.
Correct.
The access to credit of
Okay,
MSMEs.
and these are all very important, okay? So I will not belabor you, but on the agriculture issue anymore. But the point is, any poverty reduction strategy must include much bigger investments in the agriculture sector. More so that by July this or next year, we will be lifting the quantitative restrictions on rice. Diba?
We will tarify rice and
You will tarify.
They will
And how much
tarify
will the tariff be?
35.
35%.
35%.
What will you do with the collection of the tariff? The
For
35%.
agri-development. The collection of the tariff will be earmarked for agricultural development as well. Support to
To
agriculture.
increase productivity.
Yes,
Hindi
Mr.
naman
President.
cash transfer to farmers.
How will you treat it?
Or cash transfer ang
Hindi ko
gagawin
yan
natin
napag-isipan.
dyan.
Have you decided how you'll treat it? There's still a discussion on whether it's cash transfer or what kind of support for farmers. No? No cash transfer.
Useful investment, like rural development.
Mr. President, the tariff will be earmarked for rural development, for support to farmers,
Also,
Okay.
crop diversity.
for crop diversification as well.
Okay. Okay. So we've already highlighted the importance of the agriculture sector.
And I agree with you, and I thank you for
As a
mentioning
strategy.
the implementation of the Agri-Agra law and the need for less admin expense
Yes.
and bringing credit closer, easier, faster
And,
to
okay.
our agricultural workers.
Moving forward, to reduce poverty incidence to 14 million,
No, 14%.
14%.
14%.
By 2022, we all agree that we need to create 2 million jobs a year. Is that correct?
2 million jobs a year.
Right? Okay. What sectors of the economy do we expect to create those jobs? Basically, you have agri, industry, and services, di ba?
Construction, tourism,
The services sector, Mr. President, industry, tourism, construction,
manufacturing.
manufacturing, yes. Hopefully with all those, we'll be able to generate the 2 million jobs.
Okay. So may strategic thinking naman dyan. How many jobs will be in agriculture, particularly where?
Yes, Mr. President. In fact, when I mentioned earlier,
Industry,
yes.
how many jobs?
In construction alone, because of the increased infra spending, it will generate 1 million. So perhaps the balance of the 1 million should be generated
Okay.
by the other sectors
Now,
as well.
what is the participation ba talaga of government sa consumption? Public consumption is what percentage of total consumption?
Consumption.
Yeah. Government
Public
consumption.
consumption. government consumption spending is 10% of what? 10%? Public consumption spending, Mr. President, is 10% of GDP.
So maliit lang.
10%.
Diba? 10% lang eh. Okay? With regard to construction, what is the participation of government?
Construction,
Yeah.
what is the question exactly, Mr. President?
Contribution of government sector in the
To
construction.
consumption or to construction?
We're done with the consumption eh.
To construction. The government participation in construction.
30%, diba? 22,
5.4.
diba? 25%.
So,
Roughly 25%. So the government,
Mr. President, as I
yes.
mentioned, the infrastructure investment will be 5.4% of GDP for next year,
correct.
yes.
Yeah, but what is the contribution? Government consumption relative to the economy is roughly 10 to 11%. Eh.
Public
construction naman is 25%. Yes. I have the latest data here.
No.
Second quarter, 2016, public 168 billion, private 318. It's roughly 25%. Construction,
The question is, what is the government's portion in the total construction?
yeah.
And it's 25%.
Ibig
One
sabihin
fourth.
kasi, ibig sabihin, mas malaki ang contribution ng government sa construction than just consumption. So you'd rather make the investments there naman
In
talaga.
construction.
In construction,
Yes.
right? Okay? And in the scheme of things, mas malaki talaga yung private sector than the public sector. And the private sector is more efficient than the public sector. Okay? Now, let me... Maybe I should just ask the chairman, and you don't need to supply the answers to me now. But essentially...
You can put it on record.
Yes.
We can give you,
Just give me the...
In a
Where are
memo.
the jobs going to be created?
Yes.
Industry, agriculture, service. Just
Yes.
submit it to...
yes, a
Duterte.
one-pager brief
Yes,
so that we're very
Based on
clear.
the plan, di ba?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
May
And-
I just put it on record just
Yeah.
so that it's clear? What the gentleman needs, my economic team, is really where are the jobs coming from? So let's not just second guess. Perhaps
What will be the role of
yes.
agriculture, industry,
yes.
services, moving
let's be more
forward?
specific on manufacturing, construction.
You know, I know that you still do not
services,
have a
tourism.
medium-term Philippine development plan.
Yes.
Wala pa naman di ba? So let this be part of the input of your MTPDP.
Agriculture, etc. When can you submit it? By this afternoon? Yes. Even after your interpellation, before the end
Sure.
of the day,
Sure,
we
any-
will
even
submit.
tomorrow, yeah.
Or even
Sure.
tomorrow, we can
Or
submit that to you.
anytime,
Yes,
your
they will
pleasure,
submit it to
Madam
the
Chair.
Finance Committee and we will give it to you.
Okay. And let's move on to budget utilization. Okay? Budget utilization. Saan ba dito? Ito rin, di ba? Okay, budget utilization. In 2015, ito importante to. Okay? In 2015, how much was the total budget?
It was 3.002 trillion in 2015. 16. What is your question,
No,
15 or
2015.
16? 2015.
What was the adjusted appropriation? Or what was the budget for 2015? What was the approved budget?
15. 15. 2.606 trillion in 2015.
Okay.
Mr. President.
What was the total authorized spending in 2015? Because meron niyang continuing appropriation,
Yes, yes.
meron niyang automatic appropriations, carryovers from
Authorized
2014.
spending in 2015. The 2606 is the authorized expenditure, Mr. President.
Yeah, but the automatic continuing appropriations, you add that up, magkano yan for 2015?
Including automatic appropriations
And continuing,
and continuing. Total.
3.5, di ba? And this is a very important point.
Including automatic. Okay. Yes. Mr. President, the 2606 includes the automatic appropriations, Mr. President. So that's
The
the
total adjusted appropriations in 2015, including automatic and continuing, is 3.5 trillion. May carry over from 2014, spending authority. How much was obligated in 2015?
Total obligated of 2015. 2.4 trillion. And perhaps you would want to ask the total unobligated. That's 150, right? Ito yung speech ko. It's 150 million. That's
Okay.
2015.
Okay, 2015, this
Yes.
is according to COA. Okay? 3.5 trillion was the adjusted appropriation. The obligations was 2.5 trillion.
Pareho.
Disbursement was 2.167 trillion. Ibig sabihin, 1 trillion hindi na gastos, hindi na obligate. In terms of actual disbursement, cash, na yun ang umiikot sa why is it, the disbursement is important because yun yung cash na buwaba, iikot yung ekonomiya. If you can spend that faster, mas bibilis ang takbo ng ekonomiya. Now, if you can't spend that fast at obligate mo lang, okay lang to a certain degree, dahil uutang na yan. Iikot din yung ekonomiya. So, 1 trillion ang hindi na gastos in 2015. Okay?
I'm asking them, Mr. President, because based on the figures given me, it's, and I was already appalled by that figure, it's 150 million of total unobligated 2015 funds.
No.
But your figure is based on COA, and it's 1 trillion. So there's a hell of a lot of a difference between the 1 trillion
No, because they're
and the
talking about,
150
they're talking about
billion.
many different things. Halimbawa, ito yung appropriation, ito yung allotment, ito yung obligation.
Yes. But according to DBM,
Simplify. DBM
yes.
knows everything about this.
According to
Secretary
DBM, Mr.
Jokno knows
President,
everything about this.
150 billion is the total unobligated that were downloaded to the agencies. But how much is the unreleased? There's also unreleased
I can
by
go one
DBM.
by one. I
Yeah.
can go one by one here. Ulitin ko lang. And then let me relate it to 2017. Again, 3.5 trillion, 3,507,
Ang laking differential.
adjusted appropriations, that is the magnitude of the problem, obligated 2,554, spent 2,167.
What's the difference? Ba't ang laki?
Okay?
1 trillion and 150
Now,
billion.
for 2017, how much is the budget we're talking about here? 3,350.
350.
Hindi pa kasama dyan yung unprogram. Kung isama mo yung unprogram, magkano yun? 2,4 something plus 67 billion, right? Is that correct? 2,417.
1 minute suspension. You're asking, Mr. President, the big difference between 1 trillion, that boggles the mind because they're disagreeing, DBM is disagreeing that there is a 1 trillion unobligated, because the figures I
okay.
am given is
Again,
150 billion.
Again,
And
let me reiterate.
If it's true that there's 1
I have the
trillion
COA report.
unobligated, I am triply appalled by
Yeah.
that, because the 150 is already appalling.
Ganito yun eh. Kung magkano yung budget, 2.6 authorized by Congress
Yes.
in 2015.
2606.
Correct.
Can the good sponsor speak closer to the microphone?
2.6, Mr.
Correct.
President.
Hindi na gastos 900 noong 2014. Carry over yun. Kaya naging 3.5. Okay? Yung 3.5 na obligate 2.5. Ang cash disbursed 2.2. Okay? That's found even in the BESF eh.
Okay.
Okay? Now, 2017, magkano yung budget? Di ba 3,350?
3,350.
Plus the 67.5 unprogrammed. It's not part of the 3,350.
67.5, yes.
Correct? So it's
Yes.
actually 3.4 plus 17. Okay? Now, what about what will not be spent this year?
In 2016.
In
So
16, which will carry over
how much is
next year?
continuing
Magkano
in
yun?
2016. You still have it? You have it already? Projected. Because we still have 2 months to
Yes.
spend, Mr. President. But there's a projection. How much do you project? That was in my speech.
You must have a projection because you have a cash.
Yes, can I have a 1-minute
Program,
extension?
yes.
Because I had that in my speech the other day. Can I just have
Suspend it for 1 minute.
just give me your... Magkano yung unread? 256. B. Okay. As of today. And then, yun lang. So, but we don't know the unobligated of the agencies. Yes. Mr. President, we're ready. Yes.
Session resumed.
To address the question of the minority leader on what would be continuing appropriation of 2016, the unreleased portion of the budget is 256 billion, which will be utilized hopefully by next year. No? But we don't have the figures yet per agency of their total unobligated amounts. This is just the amount which is with DBM. I can imagine, in fact, I've been asking
Yeah.
agencies to submit.
Okay na yan. That's safe enough for me.
Yes.
So roughly, if you go by previous, chances are you'll be 700, 800 billion.
Of
So
unobligated.
in effect, next year, the actual budget is not 3.4. The authorized spending will hit about 4.2 trillion next year. Kasi hindi magagastos this year eh.
That's true.
Carry over yan. 2-year budget cycle natin eh. And you know, I'd like to commend naman the Secretary of DBM because the Secretary is always pushing for a 1-year budget cycle instead of 2 para mapabilis yung spending. Okay? But having said that, why is this important? This is important because Congress should be mindful magkano ba talaga yung authority to spend. With that comes the authority to borrow. Okay?
Let me just,
Yes.
I consulted Secretary Jokno, and he said that we will stick to our budget of 3.3 trillion. And the agencies, yes, I'm certain will return because some of their 2,000, no, the agencies will spend for 2017, their continuing appropriations of 2016 GAA. They will return the 2015 GAA, but they will spend their continuing appropriations of 2016 in 2017. Yeah, they have to spend it. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but we will
Okay.
spend the 3.3
Let-
trillion
let-
budget.
Okay. Remember, we started by talking about the challenges moving forward. The population is growing. We need to grow the economy at a faster rate. Kung mababa na yung disbursement mo and your economy grew by 6%, okay? If you spend this money that you're authorized to spend, you can grow double digit. That's the point I'm trying to drive at there. Right? Especially if you make changes in the budget and spend on more capital outlay in infra, all the more. That's the point. Huh? Okay, now, let me give you a rundown, an idea of where are we spending and where are we not. Huh? Saan ba talaga yung inefficiency din? Halimbawa, if you look at it by department, Congress of the Philippines, budget 15.2 billion. Cash disbursed 2015, 11.4. Okay? Office of the President, 12.2 billion. Cash disbursed 6.7. 6.7. 2015 to. Office of the Vice President, 252 na gastos, 217. Agrarian reform, critical. Hindi na nagpapautang sa farmer. 20 billion yung budget, ang ginastos 4 billion lang.
4B.
Kaya pala negative growth rate ang agriculture. Di ba? Oh, agriculture, 57 billion. Magkano ang ginastos? 23. Ang laki ng savings. Budget and management, magaling gumastos, 410. Kasi kasama na dito yung transfers, 409. Education, critical, 355 billion. Magkano ang ginastos? 289. Kaya kulang ang teacher, kulang ang classroom, hindi handa sa K-12. It's not their fault. Okay? State universities, 54 billion. Ang ginastos, 42. Energy, 2 million ang mahihirap natin, walang kuryente. 2 million households. Kasama sa pinakamahirap. 7.4 billion yung budget, 899 million lang ang ginastos. DNR, 28 billion, 19.5 billion yung ginastos. Health, kalusugan, 77 billion ang budget, ang ginastos 19.5. DILG, 176 billion, ang ginastos 161. Justice, 14.8 billion, 11.5. Napakasama pa ng DOTC. 79.5 billion ang DOTC, ang ginastos 22. Kaya pala matindi ang traffic. Di ba? Okay?
Let me just state, Mr. President, I'm glad you're putting it on record because, as you note, in every committee hearing, I started my hearing by stating to the agency their total unobligated as of that date and what they can spend in 2017. Aside from that, we already took note and mentioned to them what they should spend till December of 2016 from the 2015 GAA. So
Okay.
I really appreciate you're putting it on record.
Thank you
so that
for-
agencies know what they have.
Humihingi ako
And-
ng pasensya sa chairman ng committee kung napapatagal tayo.
No.
But thank you for appreciating it.
No, I
Thank you.
appreciate it because the media probably did not cover every committee hearing, and you are summarizing what the chair mentioned in every hearing. I cited all the total unobligated amounts in 2016 which they can use.
I attended some of the hearings and I learned from the chair.
No, I'm learning from
helping
you,
you with the
and you're
details.
able to summarize. So, actually, dalawa po yan. Yung 2016 nila, which you're mentioning, they can use for next year, and the 2015, which they should use till the end of the year.
Correct.
So, what you're saying is, ang dami nating pera.
Correct.
We have so much resources.
Daming appropriations, yes.
Ang daming appropriations, hindi nagagamit, and that's really that's a big problem.
Okay.
I agree with
you. Know, I can move forward. Okay. Special purpose funds. Budgetary support to GOCCs, 115 billion, 107 billion lang ang binigay. Allocation to LGUs, 45 billion, 18 billion lang ang binigay. E-government fund, 3.4 billion, 1.8 billion lang. Ang dami. Miscellaneous Personnel Benefits Fund, 103.8 billion, ang ginastos 81 billion lang. Okay? Now, if I may ask, meron ba kayo sa DBM na of the PS given, magkano ang ginastos? Baka over-appropriation tayo sa PS din. Kasi dito lang, sa Miscellaneous Personnel Benefits Fund, 104 billion ang ginastos. 81 lang. Diba? Sa MOE, magkano yung ito, general na. PS, MOE, capital outlay. We will see where the problem is. If we take a look at the utilization, then we can go down to the detail. Now, what is the effect of what I'm saying for 2017? Like I said earlier, kung 3.3 or 3.4 talaga naman yung budget for 2017, and for 2016, I can tell you more or less, as of June 30, or up to September, magkanong appropriated, magkanong hindi pa nagagastos. As of June 30, Congress, 15.4 billion. Obligations incurred, tama ba to? 2 billion lang? How much? As of June 30, half year, Office of the President, 6.5 billion, nagastos 1.2 lang. Agriculture, 50 billion, hindi kasama dito yung irrigation, DA lang. Ang ginastos, 21.9. Department of Education, 417 billion. Ang obligated pala, 166. Ang disbursement, 152 lang. Okay? I'm sorry, Congress pala, from 15.5 to 5. Laki pa ng savings. Office of the President, 6.4, 2.6. Vice President, 520, 90. Carry forward lahat yan for next year. Agrarian Reform, 13.9, 3 billion lang. So the next question I can go on and on. The next question is, okay, so total government agencies, 2 trillion, ang ginastos, 673 lang. So dun pa lang, that's 1.3 billion. Trillion. Half year. Total. Pati special purpose funds. You've only spent 1/3 of the budget. 3.3 trillion ang total budget.
Pero June 30 yan. What do we project?
Kasama na yung carry forward.
Ang tanong dyan,
Na 20. Ang ginastos, 1 trillion lang.
how we assuming,
Assuming you spend
it's going to be spent?
the same way the next 6 months, 2 trillion. May 1 trillion maki-carry over next year. Yung 3.4 magiging 4.4. Remember I said earlier, in spite of the bad disbursement, the economy will grow by 6 to 7%.
And what if we spend?
If you do it even better, you can grow double digit. That's the point.
Understood. It's very clear. Yeah.
Okay?
So what are we doing to make them spend?
And I think we in Congress should be mindful of the fact that this is the situation. So, what new things have we done to make sure that the budget is spent as appropriated? Anong bago na bang nagawa natin in the last 4 months?
What is the response of the sponsor?
Can you rephrase the question,
How are
Mr.
we
President?
preparing so that next year we can spend 4.4 trillion Not 3.4. It will be more or less 4.4
Because of the
billion.
continuing appropriations.
Because of the continuing appropriation. That is an authority to spend.
Mr. President, because of this realization of the either unreleased funds, total unobligated funds but unutilized, this is a wake-up call to the bureaucracy. And with the new administration seeing this problem without even engaging in the blame game, our economic managers will have to compel all the heads of agencies. And I would hasten to add that the President, I'm sure, would not be hesitant to replace an agency head who cannot spend his or her budgets. Because as you very clearly said, there's a clear need. We have the resources, we allocate it, we know the programs and activities, and so it's very clear in our minds, and the economic managers agree that these are funds that must be spent. We've allocated a 3.3 trillion budget for next year. Line item, there are provisions, there are programs. We just have to spend. I probably will stand here next year facing you, and we will see whether this government has acted differently in a more urgent manner.
Halimbawa, I'll give you one example. DPWH, under the 2017 budget, why can't they spend their entire amount? Kulang ng engineers. How many engineers will we be hiring next year? Is there a provision in the budget for DPWH?
Yes. There's a provision in the budget of DPWH for the hiring of more
Hiring of
personnel,
engineers.
including engineers, Mr. President.
Mga
Yes.
ilan? How many are we hiring? Do they know?
For DPWH, engineers.
DPWH, yeah.
Do you have the figures? Oh, the hiring of engineers is already built in the budget cost of per project,
No,
Mr. President.
So we don't have a number. How many engineers? You know, we have to
The number
beef
of
up the
engineers will be
bureaucracy.
hired. We don't have the
You
number.
need, you
I
need
can-
more. You need more teachers. You need more health practitioners, doctors, nurses, engineers, sundalo, police.
Number of engineers. I don't have the number of engineers now, but I'll be ready with that number.
Yeah.
I'll ask Secretary
Okay.
Villar, just get it ready,
Okay.
for the number of
Yeah, I'll
engineers
tell
that
you
will
why
be
this is
hired.
so. Nasanay tayong
Number of
walang
engineers, number of
pondo.
teachers.
Kaya laging nagbabawas tayo ng tao sa gobyerno. Suddenly, the economy is growing at a faster rate and more resources are coming in. We did not adjust the bureaucracy, including sa crime, more prosecutors, more judges, so on and so forth. Diba? Now, okay. So, we've shown that there's a lot of resources. Why impose new taxes when you can't spend the budget? Why are we even planning? Hindi ba kaya tama na ipakita muna natin that we can spend the budget before we impose new taxes as well?
Under the business as usual, we have not which is for the additional reducing and eradication poverty in the environment.
That's a very valid question, Mr. President, that we have so much resources unspent, unobligated, and we are likely to impose new taxes. The answer to your question is, yes, in the short term, we have these resources, but we have to generate more economic activity, and that's a reason
I'm with
for
you
the
there.
provisions
I'm with
on
you
new
there.
taxes.
I understand it.
Yes.
And that's why in my earlier remarks, I mentioned to take a look at our need and the need to improve revenue, so on and so forth as well, right? But like I said, kung hindi natin kayang gastusin, ang laki-laki ng pondo, hindi natin magastos, and will impose additional taxes, I mean, doesn't make sense to me, right? Okay, so just food for thought, huh?
Just to address that question, Yes, there's a lot of resources now. It's a new government. Hopefully, they will learn to spend it. And in 12 months, let's see, as I stand here
Remember,
before
yeah.
you, if they spent more than what was,
But please don't forget, Madam Chair,
Yes.
Mr. President, I mentioned earlier, and that's why in the beginning, Pinoy, GMA spent 9.8 trillion. Pinoy spent 12 plus trillion. We expect, without new taxes, 26 trillion. You add taxes pa, mas malaki yan. Di ba?
Yes.
And that's just a growth rate of revenue of 11%. Di ba?
we take note of that, yes.
And taking into consideration a 3% GDP deficit. And
Yes.
yet, debt to GDP will go down.
Debt to GDP is declining, yes.
Okay? Can you imagine if we grow at a faster rate? You don't need new taxes. For every, go to the BESF now. For every 1% increase in GDP, what is the corresponding increase in revenue? At least for 2017, roughly 19-20 billion. Is that correct?
20 billion for every increase.
1 percentage point.
1 percentage point.
For every 1%.
1% increase in GDP will translate to revenue based on your BESF by roughly 20 billion, 19 to 20. Is that correct?
19.3 to be exact, Mr. President.
Yeah,
Yes.
19 to 20. So that's 20 billion. So if you grow by 3% more, that's 60. No new taxes, generic growth. And then compounded pa yan as the years go on, right? Okay. Mr. President, can we have a minute suspension, if I may use the...
I was also going
The
to ask
toilet.
for a,
And then sandali na lang.
Suspended
after.
for 1 minute.
Okay, thank you.
Dali, ah.
Naapsan pa pala. Naapsan.
Wind up na? Yung submission.
Ito titirahin ko yung lump sum.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the gentle lady, may I continue with some of the questions?
Yes, please proceed.
Yeah. Mr. President, I'd like to move on to one of the reasons why we are not able to spend the budget as appropriated is because of the many lump sum items in the appropriations. One of the favorite topics, not only of this representation, but also that of Senator Lacson, and I'm sure he will go in more detail later as far as the lump sums are concerned. So for the record, Madam President, kano ba talaga yung lump sum of the total new appropriations? So tanggalin na natin yung automatic, maliwanag na yun eh. Lump sum naman talaga ang IRA, lump sum din naman talaga yung interest expense on the debt. So how much is the total lump sums? Thank you.
Okay. These are the
Magkano ba?
lump sums you mentioned. The contingent fund, Mr. President, the miscellaneous personnel benefits fund, the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund, pension and gratuity fund. These are the so-called lump sum funds, Mr. President.
How much is that?
Contingent is 5.5 billion for contingent. Miscellaneous MPBF is 96.1. NDREAM is 36.2 billion. Pension fund is 142.2 billion, and that's it. Those are the, could you sum that up, the total lump sum funds? Those are the appropriations for the so-called lump sum funds.
Okay. Okay. My figure is a little different, Mr. President.
This is based on the GAB.
Yes. Mine is also based on the
270.
GAB and the
Yes.
BSF. Okay?
Yes.
Now, I included certain PS items in the lump sum, but let me take that out already. Katulad ng miscellaneous personal benefit, pension and gratuity. I'm interested in the MOE and the capital outlay. Okay? My computation of total lump sums is roughly about 700 billion. 30% of the total new appropriations. And this is one of the reasons why we are not able to spend the budget. There is poor planning. Hindi identified specifically line items, saan pupunta yung project. Let me give you an example, Mr. President. For the Department of Education alone, it's about 250 billion next year, 249 billion. 61 billion hiring teachers, so that's fine, I understand. I don't know if you can hire all those teachers to begin with. But then there's 53 billion in MOE. You don't know exactly where this money is going to go, what province, what region. And 135 billion example, on school buildings. Hindi rin maliwanag kung saan pupunta. Ito mga, where are they going to construct the school buildings? Okay, I'll give you an example, Madam President. There is no list in the budget. Saan ilalagay ito mga school buildings na to? The DepEd would probably have a list, but it is not in the budget. Is that correct?
Mr. President?
Yes.
I'm looking at the DepEd budget which you mentioned.
Yes.
Can we give him a copy of this? It's actually disaggregated and it's regionalized. This is so far, as far as we could go.
Let me explain further, Mr. Yeah.
Let me just,
Yes.
even insofar as textbook, science and mathematics, the computerization program, we tried to the best of our ability so that it would not be considered lump sum, to disaggregate it and to regionalize it, even to tech voc training, the creation and the filling of new positions. We have the computations here because it's been
Yes,
regionalized.
I've seen all of that. I've seen all of that. Ulitin ko lang,
Yes.
Let me explain to you. Halimbawa, last year, I already mentioned earlier, incidentally, 2015, magkano yung budget, magkano ang ginastos. 2016, magkano yung budget, magkano yung disperse. All of these were lump sum items. Now, let me explain to you. What the DepEd does, let me give an example, is based on the number of students, divided by 40, ito yung classroom na kulang. It's a tabletop survey. Wala silang site inspection. Okay? They know how many students per region, so they'll make a tabletop survey divided by 40. These are the classrooms you need. So on and so forth. These are the teachers you need. Halimbawa. But then, during the implementation of the budget, that's why it's lump sum. It's not in a line item where the schools are going to be constructed. Is during the implementation of the budget, they go to the actual school site, realizing that there's no place to build. Why? Because walang site development plan. Yung mga eskwelahan natin, yung mga hospital natin. There is no site development plan.
I agree with you. There should be more planning. And if I may add to what you're saying, it's not just in hospitals and schools. It's the same story you will discover later, or you probably know and you will ask me, in the DPWH budget, where we have allocated for evacuation centers per region. And in the hearing, I asked them if they've built it, and they said they can't find any land. I do not believe that we cannot find any government land just for 2 evacuation centers per region. So I'm compelling the agency to please find that land and spend it for the next 12 months. So I agree with you.
Yeah. At least in the DPWH, marami doon nakalagay line item. But in the 135 billion of the DepEd, there is not a single line item.
We can ask the agency.
Yes. Yeah, but even if we ask them for a list, my position is, if we wanted them really to spend the budget on time, properly, more efficiently, effectively, if they had a site development plan, if they hired people to do this for them, train the principals, halimbawa,
So meron, I can...
gumawa ng site development plan kada lugar, then you know
Do they...
where to build. And that is one of the reasons why, principal reason why,
Mr. President,
example lang yan.
Yes, I am
DepEd pa
informed.
lang yan.
I share your concern, and I asked, and according to the DBN, the DepEd does a site development plan, and all the information you need is in a CD, which is just not included in the GAA.
It is
in the
only
grant.
now that I've spoken to them about it, and I do have a bill for that purpose as well.
According to them, there is a CD of the locations of the schools. That's what I'm asking for, because I said to be ready
O
when
sige,
you
if they're
ask.
really ready, bakit di nila nagastos yung budget last year? Again, you want me to go back to 2015, 2016?
I
Diba?
agree with you.
Oh.
Yes, yes. I agree with you
Okay.
that
Now, if they had better
so much
planning,
unutilization.
better planning,
Can we have silence?
diba? Okay. So that's the point.
Maingay, maraming nag-session.
Marami dito. There's so many other departments. So what we have is about roughly 800 billion in lump sums, MOE and capital outlay.
I'm one with you there. I will ask both the DepEd and DBM. I've seen the disaggregation insofar as regionalized budgeting. If indeed there is a CD of all the classrooms that will be built, that will be submitted to the committee.
And I'll make a bet with you. If we put a rear view mirror provision in this budget, which we used to have one, ngayon wala. Okay, and that list
What
of
is that
DepEd-
rear view mirror budgetary provision?
Okay,
That sounds interesting.
What is the effect of that? Dapat yan, every year, when the executive comes back to Congress, it has a report card of what it accomplished.
We will put that. I agree with you. We should have
Let's put it
that.
back in the provision, right? In the budget. Halimbawa, we promised to build all of this last year. Okay? We're asking now for a new authority to spend for next year. Ito yung na-accomplish namin. Walang ganun ngayon eh. We promised to build these roads, these
yes.
schools, this specifically. Kung may
Mr.
rearview
President,
mirror,
may I request you,
Yeah.
since that emanated from you, and that's very good, because I ask that in every hearing, that this is what was allotted, this is what you promised for this allotment, how far have you gone now?
not only the pesos and cents, di ba?
Yes.
But
So,
the actual construction.
yes, yes. Is it just, is it, at what state is it now? Yes. I agree with you there, and that would give us a clearer understanding of the budget and how much was actually spent and built. So I agree that we should have such a provision in the budget. And so if you could help us craft that. Maganda
Okay,
yun,
we'll
for
do, we'll do.
accomplishment report for 12 months, since it's a 2-year budgetary cycle. Hingin sa kanya yung special provision. That's good. And then let's include a special provision in the DepEd budget.
Okay. And why is this important to take a look at the obligation and these lump sum items also? Like I said, if you line item it, it could be an annex to the budget. Right? Yung maliwanag, planado yung budget, magagastos yan. Pero kung maraming lump sums talaga, your utilization rate will be affected. Okay? Now, that should be a red flag. Yung maraming lump sum items. No? Ibig sabihin, chances are hindi magagastos din yan.
Are you
Okay?
sure hindi nakalagay?
Why not reallocate some of them, maybe not this year, but in the future, to items that you know will really move? Na may line item talaga. Halimbawa, DPWH, we already know how many percent of national roads, primary, secondary, and tertiary, have been constructed. But we also know that the poor are located in the rural areas. And that's local farm-to-market roads, municipal roads, provincial roads. Doon, mababa talaga yung construction activity natin. Why not reallocate some of those resources to those na clearly magagawa? That's the point that I'm trying to drive at. You know, I can go on and on and on, but I'm trying to abbreviate already our interpolations, and maybe at the proper agency, I can bring out some of the other issues. No?
In fact, it would be helpful if your agency concerns can be given after this interpellation so that they can already address this, and whether it is me or my vice chair who will defend the budget, if it's DepEd, it's Senator Aquino, DPWH, it will be me, so that they can prepare for the disaggregation of the so-called lump sum and bring that. But even Even without that, I've asked them to bring that CD insofar as DepEd is concerned. And we will do the same with DepEd and DPWH.
Yes.
I am informed that it is not a lump sum. I am told that indeed these are line items. It just can't be included in the gap. That's what I am informed.
Why can't it be included?
Because it would be so thick.
So
But they actually have
how
it in
thick is the
CD.
budget now? What's wrong with having an annex? Yung
Maybe-
maliwanag, if you line item it,
We
you
can
know
annex the
exactly na magagawa. Let's say, for example, how many school buildings will be put up in Aurora province? Meron
The
ba in
solution,
budget?
Mr. President,
Wala.
I've asked them, and this will be implemented. We will annex the CD. It doesn't have to be a hard copy. We will annex the CD in
Yeah.
DepEd to prove that it is not a lump sum fund, just like we will annex the CD in DPWH, assuming it is not line itemed.
Okay.
Yun.
Since we're talking about education as a matter of strategy, education is the biggest sectoral budget, diba? As a sector. You have the DepEd, you have the SUCs as part, no? Malaki ang budget ng education sector, no? Okay, so let's continue first with education muna. Ha? I'll give you one example lang. I'll take this up during the budget of education. How many school buildings do we plan to put up next year? Roughly 110,000.
47,000.
Yeah, but if you include
The creation of
if you include the computer lab,
What
page is it?
provision and maintenance of basic education facilities, construction of classrooms, including K-12 and senior high school, would be 37,492 classrooms,
okay, I'll give you an
plus
idea.
10,000.
For
So-
2016, since hindi nyo nagastos yung budget for procurement, 66,000. 2016.
Yeah,
2017, you plan to construct 47,000.
yes.
You add the two, that's more than 110,000, 120, thereabout. In the last 6 years of Aquino, how many classrooms did he build?
6 years. Did you have it? How many classrooms? 6 years of Aquino. They're getting the information for the 6 years
Let me share the information.
of Aquino.
In the last 6 years, the administration of President Aquino constructed 118,000 classrooms. Next year, we expect the DepEd to construct, this year and next, 120,000 classrooms.
So you're saying it's undoable because 6 years of Aquino. And that's
I'm
100.
not making, I'm just giving you the number.
Yes, that it's quite
I'm
difficult.
saying that if they're prepared, they probably can do it, and they're not the ones constructing it. They'll pass this money to DPWH,
Yes.
okay?
Just note that it's 47,000 for 2017.
17, correct.
Yes.
And 66,000 the balance this year,
Balance of 2016, yes.
216. So reasonably, if it took us 6 years to construct 118,000 classrooms, do we believe we can construct 120,000 next year? Without changes in DPWH,
That's why I hope
without changes in the planning,
that you're
on lump
correct.
sums,
You're
on
correct.
line-item budgeting.
You're correct in pointing it out. First, there's the need. Second, it's been planned for. And third, there are resources. And fourth, most important, it would really create economic activity in the rural areas when these are built.
Okay.
And so,
Correct.
there's no reason why DepEd and DPWH should not embark on this nationwide classroom building project, because it's good for everybody. So that when I stand here before you next year, I can say, yes, 100,000 classrooms were
Were
built.
built.
Yes, I
Correct.
wish. I
Correct.
wish they're here.
Correct.
So can we ask them?
Okay. So now, halimbawa, so we know na mahirap magawa ito. Okay? Now, what is simple to do naman? Halimbawa, SUCs. How much will it cost to have free public college education?
Oh,
How much will it cost?
8 or 9 billion? Yung libre lahat.
Magkano ang total revenue collection sa mga estudyante sa tuition fees of all SUCs?
Remember, I wanted free college. Mr. President, I wanted to introduce a provision apart from what we cited earlier on free health, free subsidy, complete free tertiary education. For next year, we had focused on STEAM, on science, technology, mathematics, etc. Because according to the CHED, during the hearing, if I remember correctly, the funds needed would be over 9 billion. I'm not certain of that, and they said it would take time for them to compute. I don't know why, but I had wanted to include complete free college education. That
So,
would be
meaning to say, 9 billion lang. Libre na
kung 9 billion.
ang public
tama
college
yung pala ko.
education.
Who has it?
For 2 years.
9 billion ba?
Kasi K-12 tayo eh. 1/4 wala ngayon eh. 3 years, right? Next year ba? 2 years lang. 11 pa lang, di ba? So 3 years.
Hindi pa lang, hindi pa lahat. Oh, let me, I correct myself. I wanted free college education, but if it's not possible because of budgetary constraints, then
Why are we talking about budgetary constraints?
when we have so much money.
Correct.
Actually, I wanted all the CCT families to have free college education for every college-age
Why only
child.
CCT families?
And that's 9 billion. I wanted everybody free college education. Kaya naman eh.
9 billion lang eh.
But no, 9 billion for the CCT families.
No. Total collection of all SUCs today is 9.5
Magkano ba lang
billion.
pag libre lang?
So with 9 point, that's all in the BESF. You know, we read all the materials. I don't mind the DepEd submitting another thick material like that for line item. I don't mind. We read all the materials. Now, it's just 9.5 billion. Hindi ibig sabihin libre yon, tuition lang yon.
Tuition, yes.
May gastos pa yan. So the idea is to reduce their out-of-pocket expenses. So if we can source out 9.5 billion in this budget, which easily I can do, dun lang sa mga binanggit ko kanina, traveling expenses, as an example, there's many more, yung hindi fast-moving din,
We've provided
pwede palang libreng pampublikong kolehiyo. Which is not really libre, tuition fee lang to. Okay, so that's one.
just
Okay.
to
Now,
complement
let
what
me
you're saying.
congratulate the chairman. Because I noticed in the budget, in the committee report, dinagdagan mo yung SEC budget.
Yes.
Now's also the opportunity to make the investments to improve the equipment, the classrooms of the SUCs habang 25% walang estudyante. Kasi may K-12 eh. Now's the time to do it.
5 million this year, 2016.
At sino ba, what is the makeup of those going to
Yeah.
SUCs? What is the average income?
Let me just answer your previous question. Thank you for that. In the present year's budget, we have a 5 million across the board capital outlay addition for every SUC. We have 1.5 million in 2017 for capital outlay as well. Now, to your question.
In the committee report, the House increased the budget for SUCs.
Yes, and we sustained that.
You sustained it and you
Yes.
increased it further. So magkano naman natataas sa SUC? Total.
Total
In the
addition
committee
for
report.
SUCs. From NEP.
Konti na lang, libre na eh.
The total increase from NEP will be 1.7 billion, Mr.
Billion.
President.
Okay. So kung 6.2 na lang, libre na. Ang daling hanapin yun. Okay, so that's one example. Yun palagay ko, will there be an absorptive problem? Hindi ba magagastos yun kung libreng tuition o magagastos yun? The cornerstone also of the Duterte administration, which I agree, is spending on human resource development significantly. And I support that. Okay? And we're here to assist and help out. Okay? So, think about it. Kung 2015, 3.5 trillion, yung nagastos lang 2.2 disbursement. Obligated 2.5. And we're 10 billion lang. Yun, tiyak, magagastos yun.
This 10 billion is for free college education tuition fee pa lang. Yes.
Tuition fee pa lang.
And of course, we want to allocate, as you said, for, I'm sorry? Tuition. Yes.
Tuition lang.
But we also
Hindi
need to
kasama
allocate for
miscellaneous
capital outlay.
expenses, hindi pa kasama yun. Okay? Yeah, we're not even, we can improve pa the SUCs and spend more on capital outlay, use the opportunity because of K-12 to make the necessary investments to improve the quality of instruction.
We're talking while you're, and we're heeding your suggestion.
And then, Pogi points pa, no? During the time of the Duterte administration, siya nag-umpisa
ng free college
ng free
education.
college.
Mr. President, nung July pa lang, kinausap ko na si Sec Chok, no, I went to DBM. Ang unang sinabi ko, maliban sa libreng healthcare sa lahat ng mahirap na natupad po natin sa budget. Pangalawa,
Dadating tayo dun.
libreng irigasyon sa lahat ng magsasaka. Pangatlo, sinabi ko,
Lahat
kung
ito
maaari,
nabanggit ko rin nung
lahat-
previous budget hearing.
Great. That's why, natuto ako sa inyo. At
No, we work together. We work together. Kaya Ralph Loren tayo, di ba?
Tama, no? Recto corner Legarda.
Recto corner Legarda. Di ba? Okay. Or it's the other way around. It's Legarda corners Recto.
That's a good tandem. Oo nga, no, ngayon ko na naisip yung Ralph Lauren.
Okay? Now,
Baliw.
let me move forward.
And I suggested that na libre lahat. And
So,
then,
you agree with me, kayang gastusin yan. Libreng kolehiyo.
I agree with you in everything you've said
Walang
since
may
3 hours
masasayang
ago.
na pera ba doon?
Hindi.
Wala.
We're investing in the human capital,
Correct.
in human
Correct.
resource of our country.
Correct.
Gusto ko sana libre nga lahat ng college
O,
education.
sige, let's abbreviate it now on the
sige na.
education. O,
Ralph
sige.
Lauren.
Let's
Sige.
go to healthcare. Let's go to healthcare. Okay, and I congratulate the sponsor also for putting in the budget additional resources for health insurance. Roughly 3 billion ang linagay ninyo, which is very good. And with that, of course, my position has always been in the past. Today pa lang, universal health coverage na tayo. Sinasabi lang, look at the data. What are they saying? 92% of Filipinos are covered by health insurance. Is that correct?
92%, yes. So this
Okay.
3 billion will cover the invisible, informal sector, the poorest of the
Correct.
poor, 8 million Filipinos.
In fact, the poorest of the poor are already covered if we follow the CCT. They're automatically covered. Okay? Now, the problem with PhilHealth is, in any part of the world, pag 90% na yung coverage ng health insurance, that is essentially universal health care. You should not deny any Filipino na nagkasakit, pumunta ng hospital, what do you call that? You want to sleep there? Huh? No. Hindi matutulog sa hospital. Confined. Anyone who gets confined in a hospital, universally at 90%, that is 100%. The default position is, you have universal health coverage, you should not deny any patient PhilHealth benefits. Because we're already spending from sin taxes, thanks to the presiding officer, has been earmarked for PhilHealth. For the poorest of the poor supposed to be. Plus, you have regular paying members. 92% na ng population. Mali pa yung bilang nila ng population. Essentially, it's 100%. You do not need a PhilHealth card. There is even no need for that hospital to log in to a portal na sinasabi, ito yung members, na mali naman yung pagkalista ng mga pangalan sa IT na yon, sa portal na yon. Okay? So having said that, dapat universal health coverage tayo. Now, we have the same mind, and that's why you put 3 billion in the budget, believing them na kulang pa rin ng 3 billion. But I will still support that. Okay? Now, magkano ba talaga ang pag nagkasakit, how much is the Philippine Health Insurance per capita binibigay sa kada na nagkasakit? How much is that?
What's per capita?
You have the another 7,000? 7 million?
We don't have it.
7, 8 million?
It's, I don't want to invent a figure.
Yeah.
They
That-
don't have it now.
Yeah. Let me
but-
share the information. Let me share the information. It's roughly 11,000 per capita. So, ang sagot lang ng PhilHealth is 11,000. Sa lahat ng nagkakasakit, on the average, okay, 100 billion yan eh. Next year, magkano yung ilalagay natin? 53. 50 na yung inallocate ng DBM Secretary sa NEP. You added 3, that's 53. All the contributions of all of us here working who contribute to the system, progressive rates pa yan. Higher your salary, the higher your contribution. Right? Ang total collection ng PhilHealth roughly is 100 billion. 7 million to 8 million nagkakasakit taon-taon. Roughly 11,000. Ang sunod na tanong, magkano yung out-of-pocket expense ng pangkaraniwang tao?
That would depend on the illness, and that would depend
Correct.
whether
On
it
the
would be
average na.
an
You can do an
outpatient.
average. You can do an average of that. More or less, yung 11,000 is good for 30 to 40%. 60 to 70% pa ang ilalabas niya. More or less, on the average. Now, I proposed last year, this year, let me propose it again. Let's efficiently use our resources. Ha? Yung PAGCOR at PCSO. O kahit na natin hindi na pag-usapan yung PAGCOR PCSO, yung hindi nagagastos na budget, ilagay mo sa pangkalusugan. Masasayang ba yung pera niya? Mananakaw ba yan? Mapapakinabangan ba yan? Ma-improve ba yung absorptive capacity? Di ba? So how much could you allocate more to reduce? At sino ba yung pumupunta sa public hospital? Hindi ba yung pinakamahirap din? Yung mayaman sa pribado naman eh. Yung pinakamahirap din.
Actually, in PhilHealth, there's no balance billing. It's already being implemented.
You
And-
know, the no balance billing is probably true only in the specialty hospitals. But that's not happening. How many public hospitals do we have?
Kidney, lungs, heart center,
That's all
Philippine Children's.
That's all in Metro
Oh,
Manila.
Metro Manila.
Those are all specialty hospitals. Ang karamihan ng, you know how our public system works. You have the barangay health station. You have the district hospital owned by the provinces. Yun ang
regional and
pinakamarami. And then the provincial hospital, then the regional hospital in the province, then specialty hospitals in Metro Manila. Pag hindi na kaya sa region, dadalhin sa Metro Manila na yan. Yun yung specialty hospitals.
Under this proposed measure, Mr. President, maski sa regional hospital, lahat ng binanggit, basta state-owned hospital, they should not turn away any indigent patient.
When you say state-owned, that's national government.
Even regional.
But that is not happening on the
Provincial.
ground. Hindi totoo yan.
For next
I
year.
heard the debate also of President Duterte, Mar Rojas, Grace Poe during the presidential elections. And President Duterte knew that that is not true. You have the data there? Provincial district hospitals.
Mr. President, it is not just the national hospitals, but even those in the provinces.
Pangako lang yan, but that's not true.
Well, titingnan ko po sa kanila dahil naglagay tayo ng budget. May I just say, so that it's also on the record, what I envision with this 3 billion allocation for universal health care would be not just those who can come to Metro Manila for the specialty hospitals, but all state-owned, whether provincial or regional hospitals, as long as they are PhilHealth accredited, no balance billing for the poor of this country. I agree with you, said, pangako lang yan. Yan ang ating cynicism over the implementation.
You need more resources to do that. That's what I'm saying. At the appropriate time,
But we asked PhilHealth.
yes,
Yeah.
pagdating nila dito, I will prove to you na yun, they say that lang because they want the local governments to pay for it. But there's no money for that. There's none. Now, what we're discussing here is the national budget as well. 1 trillion yung hindi nagastos. You want to spend the budget faster? That's one way. Halimbawa, how many public hospitals do we have nationwide? 895. How many are LGU owned? 777. So sinong unang pinupuntahan? District hospital.
LGU.
Ilan lang ba ang DOH retained hospitals? 71.
But this is not just DOH, but lahat, di ba? Pati LGU.
Yeah, that's PhilHealth. Now, remember in the beginning, I also mentioned that the population will grow by 10 million in 6 years. 104 to 114. Magkano naman, moving forward, magkano naman ang... So, when you increase the budget of PhilHealth, that is the demand side. You're improving accessibility of people to get health care. Sa supply side naman, magkano ang budget next year for health enhancement program? Lumiit. How much is it?
21.8 billion. There's an allocation, Mr. President, of 21.8 billion for health enhancement.
How much was it in 2016?
Present year's budget.
26
26 billion for 2016, yes.
to 21. Okay. Ang laki ng backlog natin sa public health, sa hospital natin. You see it on TV pag may dengue, you see bursting on the seams. You go to any public hospital, kulang ang hospital bed. We have to we know that 10 million new souls will be born in the next 6 years. How many new hospitals should we be building? How many equipment, magkanong gamot na kailangan? For 10 million as well, di ba? So we have to plan accordingly. Now, what I'm saying is that this is an opportunity for us. If we're really talking about poverty reduction and making it easier for the poor, yung pangkaraniwan na pupunta sa Senado, pangkaraniwan na pupunta sa bahay natin, o nung congressman ako, anong hinihingi? Scholarship, edukasyon, pangmatrikula, pangkalusugan. Okay? Gamot. PCSO. Total, para sa health din yan. Bakit di na lang natin ilagay yung buong 30 billion? Idagdag natin sa pangkalusugan. We're increasing the demand side. Why not improve the supply side? Increase hospital beds. What is the statistic ba? What is the data? For every 500, you need 1 hospital bed? How many additional beds do you need? Scholarship for those taking up medicine so that we can deploy. O incidentally, magbabawas tayo ng 20,000 nurses, teachers, dentists nationwide next year. 20,000 health practitioners next year. Magbabawas tayo.
Yeah.
Nandun sa 2017 budget eh. So that's the point I'm trying to drive
Yes,
at.
I agree with you. In
I will
fact,
discuss it in detail in the DOH budget. But we have this opportunity to increase the budget also for the health sector. And as I pointed out, ito yung kulang. How many private hospitals do we have? 1,095. Yung PhilHealth, of the 100 billion spent a year, how much goes to public hospitals and how much goes to private? 2/3 go to private. 1/3 lang ang public. Shouldn't it be the other way around? or 50-50 man lang. That way, we have more resources to develop your public hospital system.
Yeah. Mr. President, before we leave this portion, let me just clarify the universal healthcare coverage. It does not only include the specialty hospitals. I made sure that was
No, I agree with you on
discussed.
the universal health coverage, yes. Para sa lahat. Pero hindi sufficient for no balance billing. Just like what I was saying on the education side, reduce the cost to get an education. Let's reduce the cost to get quality health services as well. That's all I'm saying. Can we find a way? If not through the budget, legislate, make a law that can be funded in the future.
May I
Yes.
read into the record the PhilHealth memo to me October 28, because we even created a technical working group to make sure that they understood what they wanted, that the indigent, ang pinakamahihirap sa ating bansa, ay magkakaroon ng point of care assistance at no balance billing. So it says here, the following patients and their dependents are provided with PhilHealth care coverage if they qualify
Yeah,
on
I'm
the
familiar with
assessment.
that letter. I've read it also.
Okay. So
Now,
I
my
just,
question is, may bagong board na ba tayo sa PhilHealth? Or is it the same people?
he's an acting CEO, acting president and CEO, Mr. Aristosa.
Okay.
Mr. President,
Senator Soto.
with the permission of the two distinguished members of the Senate, it grieves my heart to break up a very healthy and informative debate. But I'm not worried about the senators. I'm worried about the employees of the Senate. They might develop ulcers, Mr. President. So may I seek the indulgence of both
Yes.
senators that we take a break and we resume at
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock this afternoon, Mr. President. So to give the others time to have a break or a lunch, Mr. President.
Well, it can be at 2:30 if we wish, so.
2:30 is better, Mr. President. With the permission of the two senators, I move to suspend the session, not consideration of the House bill. It is a continuation. I move to suspend the session until 2:30 this afternoon, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, session is suspended until 2:30 p.m. this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Madam Chairman. No? Mahalaga yung laki ng population natin. In fact, kung number 12 tayo, dapat meron tayong ambisyon. Anyway, the most important resource of a country is its people. So dapat, dumating ang panahon, at least dapat ang Pilipinas, katulad ng nakaraan, ay nasa top 20 sa buong mundo. No? And that is why the population is part of the BESF as part of our macroeconomic assumptions. No? Today, Madam President, how do we compare in terms of the size of our economy? Out of 224 countries, pang ilan naman ang Pilipinas?
In terms of, ilan tayo? 36. We are 36, Mr. President, number 36 out of all the nations in the world in terms of
Thank you.
the size of our
Size of the
economy.
economy.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, thank
And
you.
right before us is Israel. Ireland comes after the Philippines, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, Madam Chairman. In terms of purchasing or GDP per capita, income ng bawat Pilipino. Pang-ilan naman po tayo sa buong mundo? Which is a better indicator for the living standard of a Filipino.
126. What are we? GDP rank.
Standing.
36. Oh, sorry. It says here, Mr. President, based on the facts, we're the 126th in the world
What year is that,
in
Mr.
GDP
President?
per capita. This is the present year, Mr. President.
Pang 126 tayo.
We're the 126th in the world, Mr. President, insofar as GDP per capita.
Okay. Let us assume that that is accurate, Mr. President. Pang-ilan naman yung ating mga neighbors? Halimbawa, ang Singapore. Pang-ilan ang Singapore sa buong mundo? Kung number 126 tayo, in the ASEAN region, pang-ilan naman tayo?
Singapore, ilang population? Give me the GDP per capita of Singapore.
Halimbawa, ang Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam.
Yeah, GDP per capita of Singapore.
Capital GDP, 84,000.
Pang ilan sila?
That's the number one is actually.
Since you cited Singapore, Mr. President, which is, they're number one in ASEAN, and their GDP per capita is 84,000, Mr. President.
Pang-ilan sila?
They're number one in ASEAN.
Sa buong
Singapore.
mundo, pang-ilan sila?
Sa mundo, pang ilan? I know that they're number one in ASEAN, but of
Yeah.
course, they're very, very small
At kung
population.
84,000 sila, dollars yun, ang Pilipinas, ano
They're
yung per
number six
capita
in the
natin?
world. Singapore, Mr. President, is number 6 in the
That is
world.
correct.
While we are 126.
That is correct.
And they're number 1 in ASEAN.
At kung tayo, ano yung per capita natin?
Our per capita is, compared to 84,000, how much is our GDP per capita? 2,800?
Kahit round off na lang.
$3,000. Ang Singapore magkano? 84? Yeah, yeah.
It is Sonny Dominguez who must raise the cash. Let us not forget that appropriation is a mere downstream activity of revenue collection. It is taxation which makes appropriation possible. The privilege to spend springs from the duty to collect taxes. Yes, the budget presented to us today is a catalog of expenditures. But because too often, big numbers mesmerize us, we seem to overlook the important fine print that every peso that will be spent will be collected from the people. And yet, the legislative tradition is that when it comes to the appropriations bill, we only sponsor and highlight the expenditures. We seldom sponsor the revenues it would entail. Kaya itatanong ko na rin, upang hindi mahirapan ang DOF, BIR, at BOC, kung ano ba ang mga gastusin na pwedeng ipagpaliban, na pwedeng tipirin. Perhaps by cutting expenses, we could lighten the burden this budget will impose on our people. Lalong-lalo na ngayon na mayroong pangamba sa pagkapanalo ni Donald Trump sa Amerika bilang Pangulo. Should Trump be treated as a macroeconomic assumption? That I would like to ask as well from our economic managers. And lastly, Mr. President, the minority will also be asking what guarantees are in place that will prevent the repeat of the scourge that was underspending, which we saw in the just recent past. How can we turbocharge the utilization in a manner that will speed up spending without leaving the government shortchanged. Meron bang incentives na ibibigay doon sa mga mabilis at maayos gumugol ng pondo? At ano naman ang mga presidential invectives na ipupukol sa mga mahina at makupad gumasta? If our people pay taxes promptly, then the way they are reimbursed through this budget, which is said to be a catalog of rebates, must be done in a prompt manner as well. We owe it to them. There is no other way, because budget delayed is development denied. Mr. President, Madam Chairperson, thank you for enduring my abbreviated, truncated, and very brief preliminary remarks. Total, abbreviated din naman ang plenary debates, shortened to 5 days. Kaya hinabaan ko na ang aking pasakalye. Mr. President, Madam Chairperson, how does the Philippines compare in terms of population to the 224 countries recognized by the United Nations? Pang-ilan tayo sa laki ng populasyon?
Before I answer that question, allow me to thank the good minority leader from Batangas and the Philippines for his very poetic and witty introduction to his questions, and I thank him for likening our budget to a tapestry of weaves and fibers that, though disparate and somehow different in regions and various sectors, are actually the weaves or the ties that bind us. And so with that, I thank you and will learn from your questions as former NEDA Director General and our minority leader now. Now to your question on population.
Yes.
Just allow me to get the figures. We're number 12 in the world. We're already number 12 in the world, Mr. President, with 102 million population.
Mr. President, we are ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration for second reading of House Bill 3408 under Committee Report Number 9.
Any objection? Hearing none, House Bill number 3408 under Committee Report Number 9 is in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we are now in the period of interpolation, starting with the general principles. So may I move to open the period of interpolation, Mr. President?
Any objection? Hearing none, the period of interpellation is now open.
Mr. President, I move to recognize the sponsor and chairman of the Finance Committee, Senator Loren Legarda.
Senator Legarda is recognized.
Of course, the first crack is given to the minority leader, Mr. President, Senator Ralph Recto. But before you recognize Senator Ralph Recto, may I move for a 1-minute suspension?
Session is suspended.
We are ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the minority leader, Senator Ralph Recto.
Senator Recto, the minority leader, is recognized for interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat. The chairperson is a well-known advocate of local weaves and indigenous textiles. And if I may liken this budget to the elegant ethnic dresses she likes to wear, then I can say that thanks to her, it is as intricately made and as beautifully woven. It is not easy to weave this tapestry of spending. You have to fasten together thousands of threads and hope that the finished product will be big enough to provide warm comfort for all, especially to the President, so that when he shows off this tapestry of spending next year, people will not be shouting, "The Emperor has no clothes." Mr. President, it has been said that we campaign in poetry, but govern in prose. The budget is the prose of governance. It is the budget that translates rhetoric to reality. It redeems promises made. In governance, funds proposed in the budget speak louder than words. The budget is also the annual expression of development plans. A program that is not funded remains marooned in fantasy land. The budget is what separates drawing from reality. I agree with the good chairperson when she emphasized in her sponsorship speech that the budget is more than a row of numbers. Indeed, it is more than a spreadsheet and should not be seen as an accounting ledger. The conventional way of reading and dissecting the budget using the traditional PSMOE capital outlay Phoenix way, or disaggregating it by region or by agencies, does not fully capture its importance to the Filipino. It is more than an allocation for payroll or an outlay for operating expenses, or how much will be set aside for travel, for gasoline, and for utilities. It is more than a bill of particulars for roads to be paved, schools to be built, canals to be dug. The conventional way to read the budget is to hold a magnifying glass over the fine print and peso signs. But to better analyze it, the budget should be held up to higher exacting standards. In short, to view it from the prism of what we want to achieve as a nation. It should be gauged by how many poor it would deliver from poverty, how many jobs it would create, how it will and where it will spur growth, how it will distribute opportunity, and how many people it will liberate from chronic hunger. These are the checklists I will soon be asking from you, Madam Sponsor. And I know that you will agree with me that although the biggest chunk of the budget funds overhead, its main objective, however, is how to overcome poverty and things that set us back from progressing. So for 3.3 trillion, how many people will march away from the poverty line by December next year? For 3.3 trillion, how many jobs will be created? Sa puntong ito, matagal na po akong proponent ng pagkakabit ng jobs odometer sa national budget. Dapat isama na natin yan sa BESF. For 3.3 trillion, how far will the GDP needle move? I will be asking this, Mr. President, because in looking at the budget, it is not the size of investment that is important, but the impact. It is the yield that matters. To truly measure a budget's efficacy, then we must subject it to the following tests: its poverty-reducing, job-creating, growth-inducing potential.
I love it.
The second framework I will be using in scrutinizing this budget is to situate it in the long-term program of this administration. If the Duterte administration will be here for 6 years, and I have no doubt that it will, and I am not among those making daily novenas that it won't be able to, then this budget is the first of 6 annual installments it will be making. In effect, this is the 15% down payment of what you will spend, of what you hope to achieve and deliver by 2022. You cannot divorce one GAA from the overall spending plan. In fact, this maiden GAA of yours is important, for it is not only the cornerstone in resource allocation, but also sets the template. I want to have a tunnel end view so that we will know where the GAA for 2017 is in the overall scheme of things. You know, planning myopia is an ingrained trait in our political culture. we cannot see beyond 5 years. We treat a 5-year plan as too long and too far into the future. Mabuti na lang ang NEDA, mayroong ambisyon 2040. Our planning cycle follows the election calendar. Kung sa lokal, ang gusto, 1,000 days program. So much so that it creates bias for short gestating projects that must be inauguration ready in time to be milked for pogi points during the re-election period. Eh, hindi naman magpapa-re-elect ang Pangulong Digon. Kaya gusto kong tanungin ang relasyon nitong 2017 budget sa mga bagay na gusto niyang magawa by 2022. 6 years from now, our population will grow from this year's 103.6 million to roughly 114 million, meaning there will be 10.44 million more people to be fed, to be sheltered, to be cared for, to be schooled, to be kept safe. That is a given. Kung tataas ang population, ganun din ang budget. Batay sa aking estimate, sa loob ng 6 na taon, gagasta ang Administrasyon Duterte ng tumataginting na 26.71 trillion in 6 years. In comparison, using straight computation, si Pinoy, 12.84 trillion ang ginasta sa loob ng 6 na taon. Si GMA, 9.8 trillion sa 9 na taon. Sa bigas na lang, kung bawat Pinoy na halos lahat ay mahilig sa unlimited rice, ay kukonsumo ng 114 kilos kada taon, kailangan natin buksan sa irigasyon ang 475,000 na hektarya. Sapat na ba ang initial down payment sa 2017 upang makamit ang 2022 agricultural and nutritional goals para hindi lumaki lalo ang GNP or gutom na Pinoy? Between now and 2022, we must be able to create 12 million jobs or 2 million a year. Quality jobs, hindi yun nagpastol ka ng isang kambing, counted ka na as gainfully employed, unpaid family worker. This data comes from NEDA, so it is unimpeachable as well. Ang tanong, will this budget indeed be instrumental in generating 2 million jobs by December next year? Ang isa pang target ay ang pag-graduate sa kahirapan ng 7.1 million na Pinoy sa 2022. Mula 21.9 million poor nung nakarang taon, pabababain ito sa 14.8 million sa 2022. Not to mention na yung population tataas pa ng 10 milyon. Hindi naman ito isang bagsakan, paunti-unti. Itaya na lang natin na 1 milyon kada taon ang matatanggal sa hanap ng mahihirap. Ang tanong, paano magagawa ito ng 3.3 trillion na budget? The budget is a poverty-crushing tool. In the dashboard of indicators of how effective the budget is, the ability to cut the number of poor ranks among the most important. Sa edukasyon, kung taon-taon, tataas ang DepEd student population ng konserbatibong 1.7% na lamang, nangangahulugan ng pagsapit ng 2022, ang numbers of enrollees sa public schools ay tataas mula sa kasalukuyang 22 million hanggang 30 to 32 million o dagdag ng 8 hanggang 10 million. Ang tanong, sapat na ba ang down payment na ilalagak ng 2017 national budget upang masabi natin on track tayo para sa educational goals sa 2022? Isa pang tanong na nasa isip ng mga mamamayan, nagising na bago tumilaok ang manok upang makarating sa opisina ng maaga at hating gabi na makakauwi, ay sapat na ba ang down payment sa 2017 upang maibsan ang traffic dito sa Metro Manila. So, Mr. President, what lies ahead for this great country of ours will be the focus of my interpolation. My queries will go beyond next year's budget cycle. Gusto ko makita ang kabuuan because government spending plans should not be confined to the time it would take the earth to revolve around the sun. I know that we may never be precise in our projections, as there is no such thing as an infallible crystal ball. But nonetheless, we must strive to predict our prospective requirements so that we can match these with our revenue program, so that we can plan early on how to finance future needs, so that we can prepare for contingencies, so that we can realize our people's dreams. This budget cannot be taken separately. It is the foundation of future expenditures. I will also be focusing on revenues, and I am glad the man who will raise 9 billion a day next year to finance this budget is here. In the Government Division of Labor, while it is Secretary Ben Jokno who gets the credit in releasing the money,